Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
It was the strangest ad Alvin had come across in a month of searching. Need a grandfather for a boy, payment negotiable, and a phone number. The people had gone crazy. The rich people had gone crazy. Alvin resented the computer's mouse over the page. Not only do they have personal nannies, drivers, cooks, housekeepers, now they hire grandfathers. And they find them if they write so confidently about their need. The old man had been looking for a job for several months already. He was completely impoverished with this pension. He himself had lived modestly all his life. This paltry pension would have sufficed for one man, but thunder. The old man thought not so much about his own welfare as about the health of his faithful friend. The old dog, like Alvin himself, has long been in need of good medical support. The cost of a veterinarian's services was scary to think about. Besides, there were no good veterinary clinics in their remote area. Helen's daughter Helen, a veterinarian, was a great professional, but the consumables, as they now called all medical drugs and dressings, had to be bought for separate money. To take a huge old dog to the city, you need a cab, and not every cab driver will take an animal in the cabin. In short, old people, especially of the dog breed, had a hard time if they got sick. Animal feed has not only become more expensive in recent years, but has reached unthinkable sums. It seemed cheaper to raise a whole bull than to feed a dog or a cat. And Thunder, a dog of impressive size and eats several times more than the owner, but one Spunger, Alvin did not do without. He also fed dogs abandoned by dacha owners because he felt very sorry for them. Betrayed by their summer masters, with the onset of cold weather, these unfortunate animals slowly died, not realizing the proximity of winter. The first to fall ill were the kittens who had not had time to grow up before the frosts. At the same time, their mother cats disappeared somewhere, perhaps surviving as best they could. Squinting their blind, dirty eyes, these abandoned ones crawled out into the weak September sunshine and gained warmth in their fur, but only for a short while. Cold, damp weather would come, and the kittens would disappear somewhere one by one. Adult cats were more viable after all. Nature had endowed them with hunting habits, but even they could not survive the harsh winters. Dogs fared even worse. Loyal to man, they were accustomed to take ready food from the hands of their masters. It was simply impossible for them to get food in the abandoned village in the fall. The villagers did not keep chickens. They did not leave food for their meanly forgotten pets. So Alvin supported them as much as his small pension allowed. He lived in his old dacha. The city apartment was completely ceded to his daughter Helen, who could not arrange her personal life. The old man did not complain. He even liked living at the dacha. No fuss, forest, near the river and clean air, not like in the city. The main thing for an elderly person is peace and quiet. Adult loneliness is not stressful at all. If there are no health problems, it is in youth the soul tears to friends, in a noisy company, to fun and dancing. Every hour, even every minute of communication. Personality absorbs the surrounding world, as if pulling out of it through the environment, the most necessary and important for themselves, and an adult, established man, so much noise is not needed. On the contrary, he has so many thoughts and images in his head, so many things to think about, and yet it would be difficult for a pensioner, in this dacha area almost alone, if not for the joys of civilization. In the village there was electricity, excellent mobile communication, and most importantly, the internet. On any occasion, Alvin went to search engines, read a lot, studied everything that interested him and what he had not been able to do before. He always had a need and could not sit idle for a day. Now that he had finally retired, he was thinking of ways to strengthen his economy, as he called the simple economy, and all the money matters. During the summer months, all the old man's money reserves were exhausted, and he decided to find a feasible job. Don't hesitate, his neighbor told him cheerfully. Jacob, a fat dacha owner, was gnawing furiously with his strong teeth on an apple that had just been plucked from a nearby tree. There's someone to guard the dachas here in winter anyway. Go on, here's a great job for you. Pensioner thought to go and guard, but not so. If before old men worked in these positions, now the easy job was taken by young and strong guys from all kinds of security firms. In the evening, tired from the days running around the village in search of the bosses, Alvin sat on the porch. The dog, who was nestled near his feet, put his head on his lap. Did Thunder see what was going on? What is so important that they are guarding there, that such strong young men are assigned to the objects? The old man asked, stroking the dog's big head. After all, you have to work on such guys, and they sit there, doing nothing but playing on the phones. He sighed heavily and with a nod, saying goodbye to his friend, who was used to communicating with the dog as with a man. The old man went into the house to think about the next day. In the morning, Alvin again sat down at the old computer and found a couple of phone numbers of organizations, as they say, in walking distance. The first was the construction of high-rise buildings. The new complex was being built just between the city and the village, where Alvin lived for the time being. All that remained was to get the coveted job and to it a salary. Hello. I'm calling you from an ad. I'd like to apply for a job as a security guard. Hello, what have you been doing so far? Why do you want to be a security guard? How old are you? The questions came one after another. Apparently, there were a lot of calls, and a set of questions was prepared for any candidate, and memorized by the questioner to death, so as not to think too long. I worked at the factory, retired. A woman's voice in the receiver didn't let him finish. No, sorry, we don't take pensioners. They hung up on him. Alvin decided not to get upset and dialed the next number. Hello, is this the store? Do you need a security guard? Yes, I do, but did you serve in the army? The male bass on the other end of the line asked him. Grandpa's phone was a cell phone, but he was so used to thinking that on the other end of the line, Alvin even smiled. Oh, honey, when I was in the service, you probably weren't even alive yet. How old are you? His voice became suspicious. 62. Alvin was getting a little sad. He was starting to realize what was going on. I'm sorry, we're in material security. We need young guys who can use weapons and catch up with criminals. I don't think you'd be a good fit. Wow, they catch criminals. Alvin said to himself, carefully hanging up the phone. No customers in the store, just criminals. This guy must have gone straight from the police to the easy bread, or else. He shook his gray head and dialed the next number, the gym, which was not so close, almost on the outskirts of town, 3 kilometers away. Alvin would have agreed to walk there every day, despite his sore legs, just to earn money. Hello, are you looking for a security guard? He started talking. No, we've already found one. A young man's voice answered him cheerfully. Our former coach just got a job. Excuse me, Father. Good luck to you. There were no more suitable jobs on the old people's website, and Alvin had to go back to the strange ad for a grandfather for a boy. It is strange, everywhere refuse, only after hearing about his age, and here even by the voice instantly determined the old people, and here it is written in black and white that it is required exactly grandfather. I decided to call. What the hell is not kidding? I should at least find out What is the meaning of the grandfather's duties? The old man coughed well, so that his voice did not seem so old and creaky, and dialed the number specified in the ad. A pleasant female voice answered, "Speaking." "Hello, I'm calling from the ad. My name is Alvin." The invisible interlocutor seemed to be very lively. "Hello. Thank you for calling. My name is Clara. You probably thought my announcement was a little strange." Alvin just coughed embarrassedly into the phone, but I can't argue with that. "Alvin, I'd like to talk to you in person, if you don't mind." "Where do you live? Is there any chance you could come down here?" "You'd better come to my place," said Alvin. "I live here." He explained in detail how to get to his village and cottage. He pressed the phone and quickly put things in order. Everything was always fine on his plot of land, but inside the cottage, of course, lacked a woman's hand. I changed the tablecloth on the table, cleaned up some abandoned things not subject to prying eyes, even took a towel and wiped off some dust. Then he washed, shaved, put on his new tracksuit, and waited for Clara. Exactly at the agreed time, at 6 p.m., a black Jeep drove up to Alvin's house. A tall man of strong build got out of it. He looked more like a bodyguard than a driver. Opening the door, the driver helped a petite, dark-haired woman out of the Jeep, wearing an elegant pantsuit suitable for the office, but not for a trip to a pensioner's hovel. Nevertheless, the lady walked confidently toward the cottage along the tamped path, already strewn with yellow leaves. Alvin approached the guests with a smile. "Good day to you. Come inside, dear guests." "Hello again," said Clara in an unexpectedly low voice and held out a small, strong hand. The driver nodded briefly and introduced himself. "I am also Alvin." His shake was stiff and as short as the greeting. The host led the guests into the house and offered tea and jam. "Tea makes conversation more pleasant," he explained. "I would love to drink tea, especially with homemade jam." Picked up Clara. "And let's drink tea in your garden. I saw a table with benches there." "Oh, great!" Alvin was pleased. He did not want to show the interior of his cottage, which was not very suitable for such a gorgeous guest. The weather was just fine for early September. The sun was warm, the evening was wonderfully warm and quiet, though in the morning the leaves of the big birches growing in the distance seemed to be falling. Alvin had been drinking strong and fresh tea all his life, adding to it all sorts of herbs, which he had collected over the summer and dried a myriad of them. "Today we have mint tea," he commented, pouring the tea into cups. "I also made my own jam from that cherry tree over there. The berries, see? There are still some left on the top. We should leave cherries for the birds, too." The host also opened a box with beautiful cookies, thoughtfully brought by the guests. The pensioner had never tasted anything like them. The guests seemed to enjoy the view and the fragrant tea, and she gave the jam its due. She looked around the garden with marked pleasure and sighed at the pure air. Alvin, the driver, took his glass of tea and moved closer to Thunder, who had been warned by his host that the guests were his own and should be treated with courtesy. The dog wagged his tail, and the guest turned out to be an expert in canine psychology. The two were also having a good time. Between the old man and the young woman, a warm conversation ensued. "I'm Alvin. I came to you specially to have a look at you at home." At home a man is really open, and you are a hospitable man. It immediately disposes to you. At first glance, everything about you suits me. You do not drink, tidy look in the house, and in the garden you have order, and therefore in the head order. Tell me a little about yourself." "Oh, Clara, my life can't be told in 2 words. I've already lived a long time. The owner of the house smiled sadly. "And you are not in a hurry. I am free from all business for today. The whole evening is free, and you will have a rest from business." My life flowed like all men of my generation, in general. Started Alvin. Finished school, straight into the army. What's it like here? It was considered a disgrace if a guy didn't go to the army, and the service was not like today. A real soldier's service, officers, fathers in fact, then long corresponded with cowworkers, and who continued to be friends all their lives. When I came back, I got a job at the plant and worked as a milling machine operator for 43 years. The work requires neatness, accuracy. I liked it very much. I liked the work very much. "And your family?" the guest asked. Yes, I met my Kathy at the factory. She was still a snotty girl when I went to the army. She was running around in the neighborhood. I didn't even notice her. But when I arrived, I saw her at the gatehouse. I didn't even recognize her. She was so beautiful, and what a golden character she had, except that I was a little jealous when I was young. Alvin laughed embarrassedly. What to say now? It was so long ago. We got married and lived together. Alvin did not like to lie and never deceived anyone, but there was a secret in his life that he had to carry with him. The only person privy to it was his wife, his favorite Kathy. In fact, she was the owner of this very secret. She was also the cause of her husband's secrecy, the only one in question. Alvin, then a young demobilized man, actually met Kathy at the factory gate. They stood in line to mark their passes during the largest gathering of workers before their shift. Alvin hardly recognized in the beautiful girl, with wavy blonde hair and blue eyes, his little neighbor who ran with a briefcase to school. He noticed and remembered her, and in the following days he habitually picked out her pretty figure from the crowd. He himself did not notice how he began to wait for her involuntarily, at first just to see her. Then he began to greet the girl with a nod of the head and a smile. Furthermore, the first lines of greeting began, conversations like, "We are on the way, neighbor." The young people reached out to each other, unexpectedly. That's how it always happens when the heart is waiting for love. Only Kathy could not raise her eyes and look at Alvin directly. She always looked away sadly, although it was obvious that she was also waiting for unplanned meetings on the way to and from work. Alvin started dropping by Kathy's house to ask her to a movie or a dance. The girl shyly refused, but her mother, seeing Alvin as a son of good parents, sent her daughter to take a walk with him. Go on. There's no need to spend your youth sitting by the window." They went to the movies, went to dances, ran to a distant forest for berries, later for mushrooms. Only Kathy was sad more and more every day. One day Alvin talked about the future. "Kathy, that's when we'll be married." He started. Suddenly Kathy sobbed, so desperately and violently that Alvin was confused. "What is this?" He put his arms around her. "What's the matter with you?" "I didn't hurt you, did I?" Kathy wrenched herself out of his arms, crying furiously, wiping her red, swollen face with her fists, and was utterly inconsolable. He sat her down on the trunk of a fallen tree, gave her some tea from a small thermos, and kept silent, barely calmed down. Blowing her nose loudly into Alvin's same handkerchief, Kathy muttered muffledly as if to herself, "If we don't get married, we'll have nothing, Alvin. I'm spoiled." Alvin froze for a moment, not understanding what she said, and then he grabbed her in his arms and spoke. "What's this nonsense, Kathy? But where did you find such a word? You're the nicest one I've got." Hugged her tightly and didn't let her go until she started crying again. Only then, with a second burst of tears, did she manage to tell of her trouble, which had been burning her all these 3 summer months while she had been conversing with the young man. By some terrible irony of fate, this misfortune happened to the girl right on the eve of Alvin's return from the army. Saturday afternoon. The young people from their shop had gathered for the birthday party of one of the girls, Lena. Kathy didn't know all the guys very well, but they had been in close contact with Lena for a long time, and with the permission of her parents, also went to a small dacha, where Lena organized her party. At first it was fun. They played, sang, danced. Then a few couples scattered around the plot and nearby bushes went for a walk. Kathy, who was taking part in such an adult party for the first time, felt very tired. She went up to the attic of the cottage and, taking off her sandals, lay down to rest on the sofa. She had visited Lena before and felt confident. The girl did not notice how she fell asleep under the muffled conversations and shouts of the guests. Suddenly waking up, hers was eerie. Something heavy was lying on top of her. She couldn't even move or breathe. As she tried to crawl out from under the weight, Kathy felt rough hands covering her mouth and the stench of vodka booze. Thomas? She was horrified to recognize the new mechanic who had recently joined their shop and had been stalking her with savage persistence since her first days at the plant. It was rumored that he had a very murky past. Often the same odor of booze followed him on Mondays when he stood in the gatehouse. Kathy huddled under his long, heavy body in terror, but there was nothing she could do. She was just a silly little mouse caught in the claws of a predator. Gasping, the girl tried to at least bite the dirty palm that covered her mouth, but to no avail. Nearly fainting from lack of air, she twisted and twisted, but it was too late. She realized there was no escaping her rapist. Then a stunned Thomas was heard. "What are you? What are you, a girl? What a surprise. Just keep your mouth shut, okay? No one will know." Kathy cleaned herself up almost indifferently and turned her back to the wall. She spent the night in stupor, silently pretending to be asleep. In the morning, without giving the appearance of feeling unwell, she went home with everyone else. Noting that Thomas and his buddy Jacob were gone, run off or drunk somewhere, God help them. She wasn't interested in anything. Kathy was out of reality. Only her shell retained the ability to smile, talk, and pretend to be alive. To her mother, who started asking about the birthday party, she said, "Yes, Mother, it was very good." Kathy scrubbed herself in the bathtub with a stiff washcloth, but she could not consider herself clean enough. She could feel Thomas's dirty fingers on her white skin, on her belly, between her legs. The nights passed in agony, and later the girl realized that this was not all. She found herself pregnant by a man she hated. Now she had to hide from people, first of all, from her parents, morning sickness, bizarre choice of food. She couldn't eat her former favorite cheese, cottage cheese and sour cream. The last few weeks had gotten bad with clothes, her belly growing and not interfering with her maiden dress and skirts. Kathy had been drawn to Alvin from the first time she met him, as if he was the only reliable support during those dreadful weeks and months. So terribly mixed up in her life, the misery of her rapist and the happiness of renewed acquaintance with her former mere neighbor, Alvin, that her head was spinning. To master the situation, to decide to make some changes, young Kathy was in no way able. Alvin listened to the whole story with a coolness that surprised the girl. Then he asked, "I mean Thomas. Where is he?" "I don't know. He ran away somewhere. They say he goes away and comes back a lot." "Well, let's go to yours and decide about the wedding," just said Alvin. "Mine are always on my side. A child is happiness." About this Alvin could not tell not only to today's guest, but also to anyone in the world, including his favorite daughter Helen and he continued his story. There was no time to relax. Soon Helen's daughter was born. While they were raising their daughter, building a dacha, and planting a garden, they did not notice how time was running away. In time, we got an apartment from the factory. Since both spouses have been working for a long time, they gave us a comfortable, good apartment in the city, right in the center. We lived frugally, of course, but we were not poor, but still, we took our daughter to the sea a couple of times. Everything like people. Why don't you live in a city apartment? Clara asked. It would be more convenient for an elderly person in the city, and friends and relatives probably remained, and also the clinic nearby if suddenly there are problems. As I buried my wife a couple of years ago, I felt bad, Slaga. Lowering his head, the old man answered, everything reminded me of her. All our friendly years were remembered. I felt sad, and my daughter had grown up. She had no luck with family matters. Her husband turned out to be unreliable, a drunkard. She left him before it was too late. She decided it was better to be alone than to waste her life with a drunkard. So I decided to leave her there, in her home apartment, and I moved here. It's nice here. Spreading his arms, Alvin sighed widely and freely. I'll always find something to do here. There are plenty of neighbors in the summer. Every now and then they call me to help with something. In general, I'm a man in demand in the summer. I can help someone with a car, someone with a fence or a shed. Fix it, nail it. Men's hands are always needed in the village, and there is enough work in my garden. In the vegetable garden, I grow all my own. In winter, though, it's a bit boring, and I want to work. I've got Thunder. He needs good treatment and food. Doesn't your daughter come to see you? Why, yes, she does. Alvin wanted to take offense. She comes, cleans up, does the laundry. What else can she do? Sometimes she takes away the gifts of her native land, as they say, but she's always busy. She works as a veterinarian. She has a love for animals since childhood, from me, apparently. My daughter and I have always, then a sparrow, fallen nursed, then kittens picked up and put. That's why she decided to study to become a veterinarian, to help our lesser brothers. And my Grom, he is also one of those dogs that are abandoned by their owners when they go abroad. And this happens? Surprised guest. How could it be? There is no worse traitor than a man who tamed an animal and abandoned it. Alvin replied angrily, You should see how many abandoned cats and dogs are left in our village when their owners go to the city. They have a friend, a temporary vacation, you know? And then they go to the city, don't care about yesterday's friends, and animals in an empty village without people's help. How are they supposed to survive? Alvin was not on the point of getting nervous, having touched on his sore subject. That's what I wanted to do. I've got a lot of them here, loyal friends, all hungry. Oh, is that what this is about? Clara gasped. Yes, my Helen saw Thunder and couldn't resist. One day, very wealthy people came to her clinic and asked her to put the dog to sleep. A healthy, beautiful German shepherd. How could they just kill him like that? Helen Mine was just numb with indignation and horror. The owner of the dog didn't want to hear anything. People like him, you see, only hear themselves. All the more that tickets abroad for Grom's owners had already been bought, and they were not going to cancel the trip. Helen Auer only waved her hand, did not even look at the bill thrown by the owner. How can you evaluate life and death? The owner left without saying goodbye. Well, Helen left Grom, hoping to attach to good people, but no one wanted to take an 8-year-old dog, even for free. Helen Mai, as she saw Grom, so and attached, but to take to himself in the city apartment, of course, could not, wanted later still to find for him the owners. Daddy asked me to take him for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. How can I help my daughter? I look at the dog, and his eyes are so sad, as if asking, why did they do this to me? Are you like that too? Believe me, Clara, I felt so ashamed in front of him. Not for me, of course, but for his heartless owners. I realized he was my dog. I immediately fell in love with him, and here we are, 2 old men. What a wonderful daughter you have, Alvin, said the touched guest. It's right, you brought her up. My pension is small and thunder, and I don't have enough, so I decided to look for a job. Now I have a question for you, Clara. Why do you need a grandfather? I think, with your financial situation, you could hire nannies, teachers, or whatever they are, governesses for the boy? The woman smiled, an open, clear smile. Well, my Adam hasn't needed babysitters for a long time. He's 9 years old. But we have a problem with Alvin. My Adam is disabled. He's in a wheelchair. My son was born a normal child. Everything was fine, but only just. I'll start at the beginning. Tell me about it. Alvin prepared to listen. I'll start with the frank. Adam was born without a father. Because of my serious work and busy schedule, nothing worked out with men. Some people see that I have a character, you must admit, strong-willed. They were afraid they'd live their whole life under my thumb. A strong woman, you see, doomed to loneliness. Others, there is such a type, drooled over my property, dreaming how they will live for many years without poverty. So many years have passed in labor. It would seem everything is prosperous in my business, but happiness in my personal life as was not. And no, I couldn't find a man to marry, so I decided to have a child for myself. Well, that's your right, Alvin said. Things happen in life. The main thing is that you have a son. Of course, the woman said hotly. I was happy, Father Adam. He does not even suspect the existence of a son. I made up my mind. The fact is that he is a family man, quite established, a successful businessman. I met him through my work. We had common projects. I don't feel comfortable telling you too much of my personal life. Maybe you don't need it at all. But today I want to be frank. Do you understand, Alvin? Of course I understand. That's what Alvin said. Please tell me everything. Don't be shy. Sometimes it's important to tell someone. Yes, it is. I'm used to dealing with things on my own. My mom wasn't much help with that sort of thing. Maybe she wouldn't even accept my decision to have a child out of wedlock. But this man, it seemed to me that he would be a good fit for my life. He was so reliable, independent, and strong, but by that time, he had a wonderful family, growing children, already school children. I didn't want to cause these beautiful people any grief, you know? Why should I destroy his already established family happiness? And I decided not to say anything to him. I would manage alone, so that there would not be any problems that would interfere with the normal life of my son and me. I gave birth so easily, I was as happy as possible. Everything was good. My business was booming. My mom and nanny were helping raise the baby. So the boy was born and grew up healthy? Her interlocutor asked a question. Yes, everything was going fine. When Adam finished the first grade, I bought a trip to the islands for Mom and son to have a rest. That's where the trouble happened. My grandmother died in front of my son. Suddenly, not even expected illness, a heart attack. Adam was shocked, stressed, and on this ground his legs failed. Doctors do not find any pathology. We have not consulted with any medical luminaries. We did not hear anything definite. They all refer to the stress of the child. What only doctors and healers I did not take my son, no one gives no prognosis, only divorced hands. The reason, apparently, is purely psychological. Whether Adam will go again or not is unknown. Some neurologists say that perhaps with some more stress, he could suddenly stand on his own 2 feet. There needs to be some kind of push that can help the boy, but no one guarantees a positive outcome. And what if the next stress, on the contrary, aggravates Adam's condition? No one would take a risk in such a case, supported Alvin. That's why my son and I have to be prepared for any eventuality. Adam needs a lot of strength to become a real man, to feel like a full man. I want my child to have a future, to be able to continue my business and build a happy life for himself. But there seems to be a perfect example in front of him, his mother. The old man spoke up. "Ah, my dear Alvin, that's when I realized the meaning of the word fatherless. When I was young, I didn't realize how the absence of a father would affect my son. It's still a discreet but purely female environment, you know. The child grows up petted, sees the world from a woman's point of view. Adam needs a man around him with experience, not today's young men who often grow up under mom's skirt and then cannot get rid of this skirt. Mama's sons, such are not able to be responsible for the family, and what a family, they cannot answer for themselves and even provide for themselves. My son, he was born, apparently, so nervous and taking everything to heart. It is especially important for him to be strong, plus he has a delicate soul. We need someone like you. After all, our Adam has never had the confidence of a grown man, and he needs it. So, do you agree?" "I agree." Without hesitation, Alvin answered. During the time they were talking, Clara opened up to the old man completely, and he could not help but feel her pain for her only son. He was even more struck by the woman's frankness, her complete defenselessness in front of a man she had met for the first time, her invaluable trust. Just like my ward animals, it seemed inappropriate to compare Alvin. How could one fail to justify such trust? The businesswoman immediately began to plan for future cooperation. She instantly picked herself up, opened a small notebook, which she took out of her purse. "In the morning, Adam has a school program, and by 2 o'clock he will be waiting for you. A driver will come to pick you up and take you home at 8 p.m. Would that be okay with you?" "Yes, of course, that would be fine." Alvin nodded his head. Then they discussed the payment. The sum named by Clara was much more than the old man had expected. Alvin was discouraged and even shocked. Slava stood up from the table and again became a real business lady, strict, even haughty and unapproachable. Outwardly it was manifested in a slightly stronger compressed lips, proudly raised head, even her height became as if higher. After saying goodbye, the woman left. Alvin was so tense that he was preparing in advance for the upcoming sleepless night. He was very tired from the long conversation. It had been a long time since he had had to empathize with such deep feelings of another person, and he couldn't believe that he would get such money for working as a grandfather. "Well, Thunder, let's get on with it." He patted his pet's head. "We'll find out tomorrow. Old people often worry about all sorts of things. They tend to sleep badly both after good news and bad news." Alvin was no exception to the rule, and after seeing his new acquaintance off, he couldn't sleep for a long time, tossing and turning in his not wide bed and imagining tomorrow morning, what it would bring him, how he would cope with his new position as a grandfather. It's easy to say, but in fact, the task is very, very difficult. Will he be able to find a common language with the boy? Will Adam like to communicate with a strange old man? That's the challenge. Alvin did not think that in his old age he would want to like someone. Grinning at the unexpected thoughts, the old man turned on his left side and finally fell asleep. He woke up early, as was his habit, with a feeling of lightness and some good feeling in his soul. Then he remembered. I'm going to work today. I'm going to meet a nice guy. He quickly prepared a simple breakfast, fed Thunder, and cleared the table. He was on time. At the appointed time, a car came to pick up Alvin. Alvin's driver honked the horn and looked out the window and waved to Alvin. Good morning, Alvin. Ready? Yes, Alvin. I'm on my way. The old man replied, and turning toward the dog kennel, he ordered, Thunder, you're in charge. Keep order. I'll only be 8. Don't miss me. He locked the flimsy cabin door for good measure, put the key in the usual place he and Helen knew about, and ran off the porch. A black Jeep drove them to Slag's house in a matter of minutes. Already at the entrance, it became clear that the neighborhood was very prestigious. A high fence limited the part of the building. They had to pass through a closed gate with a barrier, at which stood a guard. In a booth at the gate was a telephone set. That's what I got, mumbled to himself Alvin, and said aloud, It's like a closed town here. Yes, answered Alvin with his usual laziness. We've got celebrities living here. They're afraid for their lives, you see. Alvin felt a little uncomfortable, to say the least. He did not like to enter an unfamiliar space on a bird's license. The farther they drove into the buildings, the higher the houses were, the more imposing the fences, and now it was not houses, but whole castles rising among the trees. Alvin had never seen such wealth before, except in the movies, and he felt a little shy. The house in which he was to work was also large and beautiful. Alvin led him up the front stairs to the door and held out his hand, inviting him in. Mary, we're here. He shouted loudly into the back of the house and immediately turned and walked away to his car. Alvin was a little afraid to tread on the shiny parquet floor and probably looked confused, but help came in the form of a ruddy, full-figured woman in a white apron who appeared out of nowhere. Hello. My name is Mary. I'm the housekeeper. And you are, as I understand, Alvin. She smiled and extended a big warm hand to introduce herself. Yes, the old man said quietly, looking around at the ceiling mirrors and the chic decorations of the lobby. Don't be shy, Alvin. Mary smiled even wider. We are expensive and rich here, but we have simple relations. Everything is human. You'll get used to it in no time, you'll see. Mary went to the big open door to the rooms and called loudly, Adam, Alvin is here to see you. From the back of the room, an exclamation sounded. Then there was a soft squeak of wheels, and a light wheelchair rolled into the lobby, in which sat a thin, dark-haired boy, easily recognizable as Slag's son, the same warm look in his brown eyes, the same smile. But only a person lucky enough to see the boy's mother in such openness as Alvin had during yesterday's conversation could see the resemblance. The boy approached his guest and smilingly extended his hand. Hello, Alvin. I'm Adam. The old man shook the boy's skinny hand and said, Well, hello, Adam. You can call me Alvin, or you can just call me Uncle Alvin. Well, come on, I'll show you my room, said Adam and rolled forward, at the same time telling about his home. The boy was obviously happy to meet the new acquaintance and wanted to present his favorite corners as much as possible. Alvin looked at Adam with attention and as if he saw himself as a child. He had no experience with boys, no sons or grandchildren yet, but looking into the child's lively face, he vividly recalled his childhood years. What was he curious about? What could he interest the little acquaintance in? And Adam did not seem to be thinking at all. He was showing the guest his household with joy. On the contrary, he showed Alvin his new computer. Do you use the computer? Asked the boy. I have to, but I have a very old one. The man answered. Alvin watched with interest as the boy quickly tapped the keys and typed the necessary words in the search engine. The first word was router. Adam wanted to show his grandfather the possibilities of Wi-Fi. Come on, Adam." Alvin rushed to him. "Explain to me again. How can I connect to it?" His daughter gave him a good smartphone for his birthday, and now Alvin was, as they say, armed with the latest knowledge through the internet. But he didn't have Wi-Fi in his cabin, and he was happy to learn from Adam about its possibilities. The men had a lot to discuss before Mary called them to the table. They talked as equals. Alvin had no time to marvel at how much Adam knew. They went to the kitchen, where the table was set for two. "You're welcome," Mary said in a friendly voice. It was obvious that she was glad to have a new face in the house. "Inviting the guest, Adam." "Mary always feeds me an afternoon snack," Adam said. "We have dinner with Mom. That's later in the evening. Mom is always at work. Sometimes she comes late, and I wait for her. That's when Mary scolds us. How can you not? You'll get sick to your stomachs living like this." Mary grumbled good-naturedly. "The child is hungry. He's bored to eat dinner alone, and Clara is burning with work, forgetting everything. How can you do that? Yes, war is war, but dinner is on time, as they say." Caught up with Alvin. "Adam, you should grow up. Eat properly. All your strength goes into growth. At your age, now's the time to build muscle." "Yes." Adam was surprised. "And how to build them? Is it to be like wrestlers or heavy athletes?" "And that, my dear fellow, is to eat more meat and vegetables," answered Alvin. "And exercise, strengthen arms, legs, food should be well mastered." Then he realized that he had talked about arms and legs for nothing. But looking at the child's interested face, he continued, "Here is my daughter treats animals. She is my doctor, only veterinary. She has cats and dogs and even birds in patients can be. So she prescribes them just such a diet to recover faster, meat and vegetables." He continued to pour out details from Helen's practice, seeing the interested look of the small interlocutor. Adam looked at him with all his eyes, not forgetting to chew scrambled eggs with greens and drink cocoa. Mary was sitting next to him, propping her chin on her fist, looking at them with quiet amusement. But then she realized, "It's good to be with you, but I have to cook dinner for someone." And she went to the stove. "Does your daughter cure horses?" Meanwhile, Adam was asking, "She does, doesn't she?" Answered Alvin. "Last year the circus came, and their horse was sick. It was capricious, didn't eat anything. Then it went completely sick, but you have to do the program." "Yes. What kind of circus is a circus if the horses don't perform? They're a team, you know. They can't perform without each other. Did they bring her to your daughter?" The boy's eyes went wide. "No, Adam." Alvin shook his head. "The poor horse had no time to travel. She wasn't feeling well at all. Helen came and sat by her, talked to her. I don't know what the horse told, but only my daughter realized that the horse's stomach was not working. And the horse, you know how big it is. Laxatives, at least a bucket of them, I think. I didn't ask you exactly, but the horse came back to life in an instant. Just like that?" The boy laughed. "Yes, just when it was all right," answered Alvin. "But the horse could have been lost, because guess what it ate that wasn't supposed to?" "I don't know," Adam thought. "Carrots, potatoes?" Well, she could have eaten carrots and potatoes, especially if she had eaten green potatoes that had been in the sun for a long time. But it was worse. The workers did not see to it and left a bucket near this young mare, in which they washed carrots with a washcloth. Together with carrots, she managed to swallow a piece of loofah. This loofah was the cause of the horse's illness. You, disappointed, stretched Adam. How come? That's it. The old man spread his hands. That's how it happens when someone is not working hard enough, not in good faith. And why cannot green potatoes to the horse? Asked Adam. You see, in the sun and the potatoes, the strongest poison is formed. It's called solanine, explained Alvin. Such poisonous potatoes should not be eaten by anyone, neither humans nor animals. It is very easy to get poisoned. Mary, Mary! Suddenly Adam shouted. Where are our potatoes? Not in the sun. Frightened Mary, in her haste, did not understand what Adam was asking and answered off topic. I'll cook the potatoes too, Adam. Do you want them fried or boiled? No, I don't need potatoes. I'm just asking if they're in the sun. No, Adam. Mary was surprised at the question. We keep them in the cellar. She looked questioningly at Alvin, but there was no time for conversation, and again the men were left alone. Alvin stacked the dishes neatly in the sink of the sink. Well done, Adam. You've eaten everything. Even my Thunder wouldn't have anything to lick. Who's that, Thunder? Adam asked. That's my dog. He's my only companion in the house, Alvin replied. Don't you live with your daughter? Surprised the boy. No, my daughter works in the city. There is her veterinary clinic. Her patients are waiting for her there, and me and Thunder live here in the village, in a cottage. What kind of dog do you have? Does it live in the house or in the yard? Adam was curious about everything. Well, it is uncomfortable for a big dog to live in a house. Thunder, I have freedom, loves freedom. He has a huge yard at his disposal, and at night I let him off the chain, and he roams all over the garden. He's a good boy. Helen brought him to me for a reason. Did your daughter give you a dog? Adam was surprised again. Well, whether it was a gift, I do not know. The thing is that my daughter has been picking up all the animals and birds since she was a little girl and putting them back to their owners, and this dog was put to sleep by unkind people when they went abroad, you know. They will live there beautifully, and they didn't need the old dog, so Helen took pity on him and asked me to take him in for a while. And he and I, two old men, became such good friends that now I can't even imagine my life without him. How great! Adam marveled. And I want a dog so much, but my mom says she can't handle it. Mom has no time. Mary also has no time. They said that the dog should play with it, walk it, and and he pointed sadly at his feet. Suddenly the boy raised his head. A light shone in his eyes. Alvin, will you introduce me to Thunder? Of course, if Mommy lets me. In the evening Clara arrived. She was very eager to know how her son's acquaintance with his grandfather had gone. And all day long she was impatiently looking at her watch. She had a lot of things to do and wanted to go home. She barely waited for Alvin to pull up in front of the house and got out of the car. Alvin, whom the driver had to take home, was already ready to leave. Adam was sitting next to him in his stroller, his face lighting up at the sight of his mom. Mommy, can I go to Alvin's tomorrow? Clara acted to herself. Wow, the son is already going to visit. So the acquaintance had taken place. The woman was overjoyed that the men had become friends. She greeted Alvin warmly and asked how the day was. Fine, Mom, said Adam quickly. I found out about Thunder. I want to see Alvin's dog. May I, Mom? The mother didn't recognize her usually reserved and bored son. Her face flushed, her eyes burning, and the expression of joy on her pale face pleased her most. She laughed. All right, as long as it's not too much trouble for Alvin. Adam, have you been so impertinent as to ask for a visit? Oh, come on, Clara. Alvin was embarrassed. I'll be only glad, and Adam will be really good at my place. He and Thunder will make friends, I'm sure." They agreed that in the morning Adam would go to classes as usual, and at 2 o'clock Alvin would bring him to Alvin's house. After saying goodbye to everyone and glancing at the kitchen window, where Mary's silhouette could be seen, Alvin got into the car and Alvin drove out of the yard. Thunder greeted him with a joyful bark, missing him. "Well, Thunder, now we'll work together." Alvin spoke, putting a bowl of food in front of him. "I'll be the grandfather, and you will be Adam's pets. He is a good, kind boy, and smart to what I am at his age." Alvin laughed softly and waved his hand. The old man was so full of impressions that he didn't even eat dinner. Mary had a good meal today. He sighed. A woman's cooking, yes. After a quick drink of tea with whatever was at hand, he drifted off to sleep, but before his eyes were the boy's shining eyes, the mirrored walls of the fancy house, and the full hands of beautiful Mary. He smiled at this vision and sighed. Life seemed to be getting better. Alvin, as always in anticipation of any guest, began to clean up first thing in the morning, first around the cabin, then inside. He swept the already clean paths, tidied up Thunder's kennel, rinsed his food and water bowls. He did not like this time of waiting, when there seemed to be nothing to do, but his heart was still pounding, where he had overlooked, where he had left a mess. To distract himself, he began to go through fishing gear. The time would pass faster and the heart would calm down, because for an elderly man, any event brings a lot of excitement. Alvin delivered Adam on time. It had only been half an hour since his class had ended. He easily pulled out the stroller and put the boy in it. Adam, looking around and worrying, rolled down the path towards the cabin, but immediately stopped. "Thunder," he breathed out. The dog looked directly at the boy with her intelligent eyes, alert with her beautiful ears. She licked her lips and Adam laughed. "Well, Thunder, meet him," said Alvin to the dog. "This is our Adam. This is your own. You will serve him as you do me. Do you hear?" He rolled Adam's baby carriage closer to the dog. "Well, here he is. Thunder, Adam, socialize." The boy looked up at him. "Can I pet him?" "Of course you can," Alvin replied. The boy slowly reached out his skinny hand and with a careful movement, placed it on the dog's big head. "Thunder," he breathed out. The dog licked his hand and laid his head near the boy's feet. Adam leaned down and continued to stroke Thunder's thick fur. It seemed to him that he could sit like that all day, but Alvin was already calling his guests for tea. Mary had sent some apple pie with Alvin, by the way, so the tea party was a success. It was held in the same place where Clara had sat the other day with her host at a table in the garden. Thunder watched them from his seat, squinting his intelligent eyes and wagging his tail. In the fresh air, Adam's appetite was great, even took a deep breath after lunch. "Ooh, he's full. Shouldn't we guys go to my daughter's veterinary clinic?" Alvin suddenly suggested it. "Alvin, you're with Adam tonight, right?" "Yes, that's what Clara ordered," answered the mighty Alvin in a bass voice. "Let's go, the weather is great. The day is wasted. Come on, come on." And he began to put Adam in the car with jokes he only managed to shout. "Bye, Thunder, I'll come to you." The veterinary clinic struck Adam so much that he kept silent for a long time, only listening attentively to Helen's story. The girl was not expecting guests, but was pleased with her father and his friends. "This is how we work," she said, showing Adam treatment rooms, devices and couches for four-legged patients, and special devices to hold patients in the right position. It would be nice, of course, to update a lot of things, to make repairs, but the boy saw a lot of animals that were receiving medical care. Helen also showed the shelter where the animals are waiting for their owners, who have to leave them here for a while. Adam was particularly impressed with Adam, a ward for abandoned animals and birds that had been abandoned by their previous owners. There were also those who had been found, brought in by kind-hearted passers-by. Veterinarians helped them, but they could not arrange permanent residence for these pets, and the poor creatures had to huddle in a small adapted room where it was dark and quite cramped. Unfortunately, we don't even have any money for them. With a heavy sigh, Helen said, "We feed them what we can. It's a pity for them." The boy was so amazed by what he saw that he drove home in silence. When he was brought home, he waited impatiently for his mother. Finally, she entered with a smile to her son. "Well, what news do we have today?" "You know, Mom, I've been waiting for you so much," declared the son. "I wanted to ask your permission. Can I give my money to feed the animals?" "Wait, what animals?" The woman was surprised. "There, at the veterinary clinics at Helen's, the animals there have nothing to eat, you know? They don't get any money for food. Helen said so." The boy told his mother for a long time about his impressions, about the house, about the abandoned animals. She looked at her son and her heart was warm. She did not expect that the little heart of her child was so kind. "Do you want to help them?" She finally asked when Adam had finished his story. "Yes, I broke my piggy bank. There is a lot of money in there." "What do I need it for?" "I've got everything, Mom, don't I?" "You do." His mother answered him affectionately and stroked his head. "You have a good heart, son. I'm proud of you." "So it's okay." The child's eyes shone. "Well, of course you can, because it's your money. You can spend it as you wish, and it's a good thing." Clara was shocked by such an independent decision of her son. The woman saw in what an elevated mood the boy was. "And this is for 2 days of getting to know Alvin," she thought. "No, I did everything right. A man with invaluable worldly experience. A decent man. It should have happened. I hadn't made a mistake in choosing my grandfather." Meanwhile, Alvin, too, was under a strong impression of the last days of his life. His regime had changed. His surroundings had grown wider. There were new good people around him, and most of all he was happy to communicate with them. It was easy for him to be with Adam. He felt like he was in a distant childhood when everything was easy and simple. They talk, play, socialize with each other, and they don't need anyone else. How could anyone get paid for something like that? The next day, after a day of work, Alvin headed resolutely towards his employer as soon as she got out of the car. "Clara, I somehow got confused and didn't ask what exactly are my duties." He addressed her. "We've only talk and have fun with Adam." "I can't get paid for that, can I?" "No, Alvin, you don't have any special duties. Don't come to us like a job, but like your loved ones, if possible. Talk to Adam like you would talk to your grandson. He's been like family to me from the first minute, Clara. The old man's in a hurry. He's easy for me, but that's the most important thing." The woman interrupted him. "Adam's male influence comes in handy. He's so decisive with his savings. He's a real man." And she laughed happily, and Alvin sighed in relief. It had been 3 months since Alvin had been a grandfather. Every day he became more and more attached to the boy, and Adam responded to the old man in the same way. Mary, the housekeeper, only smiled at the two of them, a lonely woman who had also long lived with the interests of her adopted family. She loved Adam as much as if he were her grandson. She had been unlucky in life. Her husband was a drunk and abusive man. Mary's child died in infancy. Eventually, Mary ran away from her husband and took up residence in someone else's home, which became her own. And now she gave all her unspent maternal warmth to the mistress of the house, Clara. Recognizing in her young self, lonely, strong, but also wanting warmth and love. When Alvin appeared in the house, she instantly recognized him as a decent man. He was modest, neatly dressed, but felt the absence of a woman's hand. Going into the kitchen, always notices small things that need a man's strength. Lifts, fetches, and screws what is needed. Mary has more than once caught herself that with pleasure looks at the thin face of a man and thinks, "If only I had once had such a husband." Then she remonstrated and scolded herself. "What are you thinking about, young ladies in waiting?" But her heart could not command, and again she tried to treat the man something especially tasty. All the more that her favorite Adam, next to Alvin, seemed to acquire a wolfish appetite, and that pleased her madly. She began to prepare larger portions so that she could wrap the rest and give it to Alvin to take with her. "It's a pity, Alvin. Take some food. Don't hesitate to have dinner in the evening. It's too much trouble to cook." He was embarrassed, even blushed a little, but he dared not refuse the treat and was especially courteous to her the next day, when he came with his pupil for the afternoon meal. Now Alvin accompanied Adam everywhere, and to the pool, where the boy had individual lessons, and to classes in the rehabilitation center, and for walks. They never bored each other and always found topics to discuss. Sometimes, when Alvin had the weekend off, Adam would call him and ask him to come over. Alvin thought that without an agreement with the landlady, he should not take too much initiative and was sly. "Adam, you're a man. You should realize that Thunder misses me," he said back, "and some household chores are piling up." "Why?" pulled Adam. "If I could come to you, I would help you and play with Thunder. He wouldn't be bored." And on his last day off, the boy asked him directly, "Alvin, can I come visit you?" "Sure, come if your mom lets you." Alvin breathed out a sigh of relief, and his mother did allow it. Moreover, she brought Adam herself, and she brought Mary with her. Alvin only grunted in embarrassment. Adam and his mother took a ride along the path. Then Clara decided to walk to the woods, and Mary began to clean the house. And as he did not persist, she, smiling, washed, rubbed and scrubbed and said, "It's been a long time since a woman's hands have been here. So Alvin, you let me clean up, and you entertain the guests." The bright winter sun was already beginning to warm up, so the adults were not afraid that Adam would catch cold. Thunder played with the boy with pleasure, forgetting about his old ailments. Adam's options were limited too, so the two were quite content in each other's company. As always, after fresh air, the boy ate boiled potatoes with appetite, dipping them in melted butter. Dinner was prepared this time by Alvin himself. He allowed himself to brag. "Well, the potatoes from our garden are good, eh? Crispy, aren't they? And my neighbor's butter, pure cow's butter, I save every year since autumn. Eat it. It's a natural product, not some synthetic one." Clara even squinted. It tasted so good. The day off had gone wonderfully. She said as she finished her dinner, "Thank you for your hospitality, Alvin. It's time for us to go, and Mary has finished cleaning up," said Clara. "Mom, it's so nice here. Can I stay at Alvin's for the night? I'll be gone and Thunder will miss you." The boy's eyes shone and his cheeks blushed. The mother saw how happy the child was in the company of the old man and Thunder. "Clara, let Adam stay. Tomorrow is Sunday. Alvin can come and get him. If you don't trust the old man, let Mary stay. There is enough room for everyone." Alvin supported the boy. Adam looked at his mother in such a belittling way that she hesitated. Here Mary also put in her weighty word. "If necessary, I'll stay here. Let the boy play in the fresh air, and all in the city, and in the city. And tomorrow night you'll send a car for us. What am I going to do with you?" "Stay, you insolent guests," laughed Clara. From that day on, Adam's overnight stays at his grandfather's house became quite frequent. Adam spent almost every weekend with Alvin. Sometimes Mary stayed overnight to prepare a good meal for the two men, but this happened very rarely because her main work required her presence in the big farmhouse. The old man and the boy were so strong that the two of them never got bored, and thunder did not let them get bored. Spring came, and one weekend, watching Alvin dismantle fishing gear, Adam became interested in unfamiliar objects. "What's this? What's this? And how does the feeder catch?" he asked Alvin. He patiently, even with pleasure, showed everything and told about the tricks of fishing. "Wow," the boy's eyes lit up, "and I have never been fishing." Alvin realized it was time. If in time to support interest, it will be Adam's gift for life, and if you lose this moment, so it will fly away, and the boy will not become a fisherman, never in his life. "Well, tomorrow then, without any solemnity," he said. "Let's go to bed, and tomorrow at 5 a.m. we'll meet the dawn at the river." Adam gasped. "Really? We'll get up and go. That'll be the truth. We're our own masters, aren't we?" Trying not to show his excitement, Alvin answered him. Yes, he was worried. The boy was not used to hardship, the damp morning, the chill, and the damp air. There was no telling if he would enjoy it all, but it was said done. Up at the right time, quickly packed and set off. Mary grumbling and putting on Adam a warm old Alvin jacket, kept shoving them a bag of food, then crossed discreetly to the boy his stroller. It was Adam's first fishing trip. You can't go far in a stroller, and it was decided to fish in the pond, about 500 meters from the road. The old man spoke in detail about how to fish properly, how to string worms, how to cast the rod. At morning dawn, beat good, Alvin began to drag one fish after another. Adam awkwardly slung the rod, long, uncomfortable, but here he was lucky, a bite. He froze, looking at the float, then looked at Alvin. He said silently, "Pull." The boy pulled the rod. A small, silvery fish flashed in the air. "Yay!" Alvin shouted in a whisper, and Adam immediately picked up the joke. Hooray! The joy of catching their first fish was greater than the new cell phone they'd bought for Christmas. The fishermen got into the excitement and didn't notice how time flew by. Soon there was a nice catch in the bucket. Alvin was pleasantly surprised that Adam did not show any weakness of spirit. He patiently chased away the mosquitoes that were so pesky as the air warmed. He didn't whine when the fishing hook got caught in his hair, and in general, he was a tough little man. That afternoon, Mary boiled the royal fish soup in her own special recipe, and the rest of the fish were roasted on the brazier, and the men went together to build the fire and clean the fish. Despite being tired and unaccustomed to hard work for him, Adam did not think of giving up. He also cooked fish on the fire for the first time in his life and was proud that he was really helping adults. He enjoyed looking at his hard-earned calluses and scratched, hooked fingers. He might not become a fishing enthusiast, but this joy would stay with him for the rest of his life. Alvin thought, and Mary, looking at the way her favorite flies to the soup, rejoiced, strengthened health and ruddy cheeks Adam. Summer days passed one after another. Adam got tanned and strong. Mary laughed. Before this summer, she had been racking her brains, inventing a particularly tasty dish for the boy, but here he ate everything and asked for more. A healthy body is a healthy spirit. The driver, Alvin, exclaimed, feeling how the boy was getting stronger. He had to lift both the child and the wheelchair to load them into the car, and he could tell exactly how much his ward weighed before his walks with his grandfather and how much he weighed now. Fall was approaching again. One Saturday evening, Mary and Adam also drove over to Alvin's house to take a break from the noise of the city and enjoy the last of the warm money together. Mary and Alvin, for a long time, have not hidden mutual sympathy, and the woman did not hesitate to come to patronize in his bachelor household to prepare dishes tastier. It was a quiet, peaceful evening. Nothing boded ill, but age sometimes gives out unexpected and unpleasant things. In the evening, Alvin suddenly felt sick, shortness of breath and dizziness. In order not to cause panic in Mary, already prone to excessive worry, he quietly called Adam. "Adam, I don't feel well. My blood pressure must be up. We won't make any noise, or we'll scare Mary. I'm going to take my medicine and lie down while you feed Thunder. I'll just lie down for a while, and then we'll go to dinner with you." Adam nodded understandingly and rolled the baby carriage to the dog kennel. He fed Thunder, scratched him behind the ear, and talked to his four-legged friend. It was time to go after Alvin. When the boy pulled into the old man's room, he saw Alvin lying on the bed, the man's eyes closed, one arm dangling to the floor. Adam was frightened. It seemed to him that the old man was not breathing. "Grandpa Alvin, don't die," shouted the boy. Without remembering himself, he jumped up sharply from the chair and took a few steps towards Alvin. But from the strain near the very bed, he fell to his knees. Alvin jumped up on the spot in horror. "Jesus, Adam! What happened?" He shrieked, scooping the boy up under his arms, lifting him off the floor. Adam, both crying and laughing. "I was frightened. I thought you were dead." "Well, Adam, don't cry. It's all right. Nothing's going to happen to me. It must have been the medicine, and I dozed off. And you? Did you come to me by yourself?" "I don't know. I guess I don't remember. I was really scared." Alvin sat on the floor, cradling the child, and could not understand anything. Was Adam so shaken by the fright that he was able to take independent steps? The man believed and disbelieved, but for now he was afraid to test his hunch. Adam sobbed one last time and looked up at him. "Grandpa Alvin, don't tell Mom I cried," he said embarrassedly. "Oh, come on, honey. Of course I won't. Did you cry?" "I didn't see any tears." Alvin pressed the child's blonde head to his breast and kissed the top of his head discreetly. He was touched to the core by the boy's anxiety. Meanwhile, a frightened Mary appeared in the doorway, having come running to Adam's shrieks from the far corner of the garden. "What on earth is going on here?" she exclaimed, poking her head through the doorway. "Is everyone alive? What's going to happen to us? We are strong men, almost heroes," answered Alvin with a smile. He pulled Adam away from him and offered, "Come on, let me lift you up, and we'll try to take a few steps. Don't be afraid, Adam. I'll hold you up." The old man lifted the boy off the floor and held him up until the boy had his legs spread firmly. Mary froze in tense anticipation, but remained patiently silent. "Well," quietly ordered Alvin, and Adam took the first step. Even though his grandfather held him with both hands, even if it was only one step, but he took it himself. Adam was covered with sweat, his face was flushed, his eyes were fixed on his feet, as if he was mesmerized by their movements. Alvin gently nudged him forward, and the boy took another step, then another, and now the old man slowly led him around the round table across the small room. After taking a few steps, Adam looked up at his grandfather with some crooked, tortured smile, as if not believing himself. Then hesitantly, with Alvin's encouragement, he took a couple steps toward the exit. "Jesus, Adam." Mary, who was standing in the doorway, embraced him with her arms and pressed him to her warm chest with all her heart. The woman cried and kissed the boy with wet lips, then took his head away from her, was immediately frightened that he was standing almost on the same level as her, on his own feet, and began to cry with joy again. Everyone was stunned, in a ghastly excitement, dropping something now and then, murmuring their worries. Mary set the table, and the men, silently digesting the excitement of the minutes past, smiled at their thoughts. Finally, the hot tea helped everyone to calm down and relax, and the three of them began to remember anew what had happened, trying to make everything look funny or amusing. Needless to say, the feelings of the three loved ones when they went to bed quite late in the small house among the greenery of the garden. The boy, as might be expected, was tired after an unaccustomed walk. Even though it was only a dozen other steps, but for him it was equal to a space flight. Therefore, the hero fell asleep with a happy smile on his face. Alvin, as always, was worried about the future of Adam. Would the child be able to overcome his fear? Would he go with confidence and determination? Would this urge to walk turn out to be a remission? He tossed and turned for a long time, remembering his fear, then smiled when he saw Adam's frightened face again. At old age, you don't give a restful sleep. Well, and Mary, according to the eternal female habit, prayed fervently for her beloved Adam, asked the Lord for mercy, and secretly admired Alvin. If it weren't for him, none of this would have happened to Adam. It is he, Alvin, who helps the boy to find strength. And then she shamefully hid her face from herself in the pillow after Alvin suddenly snapped. In the morning everyone remembered yesterday's joy. Adam could not wait to start walking as soon as possible. Since the evening, the adults had warned him not to start walking on his own in the morning. Your leg muscles are still very weak. It's dangerous. You have to take it easy for the first few days, Alvin explained. Be sure to wait for me, just the two of us. Adam promised. He barely waited for breakfast to be over, even ate against his custom. Not as well as usual. Well, hurry up. Now. Alvin smiled at him. Thunder watched in amazement as his two masters, big and small, intertwined into one four-legged creature, passed by his kennel time after time. Adam had a hard time walking on the ground. The path seemed to curl up under his feet, as if on purpose, preventing him from walking. The boy was sweating and out of breath, but again and again Alvin spoke. Let's go. He practiced so persistently that after lunch he didn't even object when Mary laid him down in the shade on a wide bench. Happy, he fell asleep in the fresh air, only his cheeks flushed with a healthy blush, and the old men sat together, admiring the sleeping child and talking quietly about their own things. What happiness God had given them, how great it was to be not lonely in their old age, how good it was in the garden today. They didn't talk about everything, of course, but they kept silent about something secret. It was Sunday evening, and they waited anxiously for the arrival of Clara at the dacha. Finally, her black Jeep stopped near the gate of the cottage. When she opened the gate, the woman saw that the wheelchair was empty and standing orphaned, and Adam was walking carefully along the path leading to the house. He was being carefully supported by Alvin, and next to him was a huge Thunder, forgetting about his advanced years. Clara stood silent and cried, afraid to break their idyll. She even managed to hold back a cry of joy and waited until her son came to her. Then they had tea again, talked about yesterday's events, discussed every little thing that came to mind. Excited Adam dreamed how he would go fishing, then to the forest for mushrooms then. There was no end to his dreams. Wait, Adam. Alvin slowed him down. Remember what Helen said about the weakened wings of birds that don't fly for a long time in the hospital? So did you. Your legs have been immobile for too long, and now the main thing is not to hurt them. You and your mom will show yourselves to the doctors. They will tell you how to restore their strength, and then you and I will go anywhere." Finally, they began to get ready to go home. When the boy got into the car, Alvin said to Clara, "I guess you don't need me anymore." Adam, of course, must be urgently shown to the doctors, although I can tell you without doctors that everything will be fine. The old man became sad. He would not go to his pupil every morning now. Tears were ready to come to his eyes. Clara hugged him heartily. "Don't be silly, Alvin. How will we be without you? I have no words to express my gratitude to you. You not only became my son's grandfather, but you replaced the father I don't remember. You will always be a part of our family. Yes, you are like family to me too," the old man said, quietly wiping his eyes. He waved after the car for a long time and knew that tomorrow the young woman would call him and invite him to her place. Mary, holding Alvin by the arm, slowly walked along the leaf-strewn path to the house. Today they again visited the cemetery where Kathy, Alvin's wife, repented on the day of her death. Mary carefully tidied up the grave of a woman she had never known, but from her daughter Helen she judged that Kathy was a kind and sincere woman. Otherwise, how could Helen grow up to be so kind-hearted and hardworking? "It's just a pity that things didn't work out for my daughter with her family and children," Alvin always regretted, and she was left alone with her beloved animals. "You, Alvin, do not anger God," Mary consoled him. "What can you do? Not everyone is given such happiness as having children. So you see, I've lived my life like a barren flower. Yes, you are Mary, and now you are still quite blooming." The old man smiled and grabbed to hug his girlfriend. "Wow, barren flower, what would I do without you?" They became friends immediately, from the first days of their acquaintance, and then lived together to brighten up two lonely lives. At first, Mary stayed for the weekend. Then, as she grew older, she was replaced in the big house by Clara, a young assistant, and she finally moved to Alvin's house. The two of them were calm and joyful. They walked leisurely around the garden, trying to please the children with apples and ripe plums. The number of children, along with Helen, had long included Clara and Adam, who had grown into a tall, handsome man. All these years, Alvin's life went not just next to, but in close connection with his new family, Clara, Adam, and Mary. Clara more than once or twice invited him to move into her house. She even offered to build a small outbuilding in the same yard so that he wouldn't have to travel back and forth. But the old man held independent views in everything. Moreover, now he was not alone. Luckily for him, he met Mary, who doted on two men, Adam and her Alvin, as she always called him. Helen was incredibly glad that her father was not alone. She quickly became friends with Aunt Mary, as she began to call his new, although not young, wife. The old people didn't sign. Why such tenderness? It is not their business to attract unnecessary human attention to themselves. It is enough for them to live nearby quietly, so that there is a companion on a cloudy day, a sunny morning, or a sleepless night. With the groans of an old man, there is no escape. Helen came to see them quite rarely now because she was addicted to tourist trips around the country. The old people's house was filled with magnets, souvenirs, all kinds of embroidery and rugs from different parts of the world. Adam has grown up over the years, graduated from school and college. No one would have imagined that the handsome young man, who was once disabled and spent several years of his childhood confined to a wheelchair. At the beginning of his career, he completed an internship at Clara. Mom wanted her son to have his first experience under her supervision. However, after receiving his diploma, the son decided not to work with her. "No, Mom, no," he stated firmly. "I don't want to be a mama's boy. That's the first thing. You will understand me here, right?" Mother could not resist his disarming smile. "Well, suppose I understand, but I wouldn't control you so much." She objected weakly, clearly realizing that in fact, she could not help but interfere with her son's work. And what Mother could? "And the second reason is, I'm not interested in your industry, Mom. You know, I have always dreamed of internet technologies. What should I do now?" "Forget about your dream?" Clara, of course, agreed. She remembered herself very well in her youth. She never knew how to obey someone else's will. She did everything in defiance of everything. If only he could achieve his goal. Maybe this is the secret of her success. Well, she won't cross her boy's path. Let him build his life the way he likes. He is an adult, independent man. Adam really wanted to achieve everything himself, as Alvin once taught him. Not believing in God or the devil, Clara only gasped and mentally spat to the side so as not to jinx it when faced with his stubbornness, bordering on stubbornness. Her weak boy, who once suffered from 2 strong experiences, imperceptibly grew stronger physically and spiritually, and all thanks to the fact that he received life lessons in time from an old, unremarkable, in general, man, grandfather Alvin. Clara thanked fate for receiving some kind of magical hint that summer. Her son needs a friend, a mature man, an experienced and decent person. So people who were completely strangers to each other became close and became, in fact, one family. Adam, having left his hometown, did not abandon his grandfather Alvin. He made sure to deliver him a good computer. And now Alvin was a user, better than some of the young people, and he and his mother also organized a good renovation in the country house where 2 of their relatives now lived, and the life of Mary and Alvin became completely comfortable. Clara also met her fate at an exhibition of young artists and got married. "Hello!" It came from behind the gate. "Do you accept guests?" "Oh, Clara!" Alvin was happy. "Mary, put on the kettle." Clara and Ethan arrived. "We came to you for a reason," said joyful Clara. "We brought you invitations, so Adam's wedding is coming soon." And she handed Alvin an envelope decorated with 2 doves. Behind her, the silent bumpkin Ethan smiled, who, smiling so silently, made friends with the inhabitants of the country house and the young shepherd Rada, who was sheltered after the death of Thunder. It turned out that Adam met a good girl and proposed to her, and now joyful chores lay ahead, preparing gifts, dressing for the wedding. "Well?" Clara said, finishing off the delicious tea from Alvin with his signature dried herbs. "Tomorrow we will pick you up at this time. You need to buy beautiful outfits." "What about us, old people?" Both protested. Clara stopped them with one wave of her hand. "Come on. Our Adam must have the most beautiful relatives. Do you agree? It's a shame. What will the bride's relatives think?" The old people sighed. Yes, it was not worth disgracing the boy. Alvin and Mary were among the most honored guests. "Meet these 2 people who are dearest to me." Adam introduced them to his bride and matchmakers. "My grandfather Alvin. I owe my character, strength, and health to him. And this is Mary, my nurse and water maid, well, almost a nanny. And now she's also a grandmother, since she's my grandfather's wife. I'll tell you a lot of good things about them." Alvin and Mary were embarrassed, furtively looking at the beautiful bride and their pet Adam, but soon got used to it and completely devoted themselves to the holiday. The guests had fun, said toasts, as usual, wishing the newlyweds eternal love, family happiness, and many children. Mary, as usual, cried with joy in such cases, and Alvin only grunted with displeasure, wiping an unsolicited tear from his eyes.
Subscribe and click the bell.
The head was telling. Nancy opened her eyes and for a long time could not realize where she was. Scant sunlight streamed into the room through the boarded-up window, and it smelled damp and musty. Nancy tried to get up, but found her arms and legs tightly bound with ropes, cutting painfully into her skin. God, what's happening? The girl thought. Where am I? The last thing she remembered was her and her husband celebrating their anniversary and drinking wine. She was pulled heavily into a dream. Frank carefully carried Nancy to the bedroom. And that was it. And now she was tied up in the middle of nowhere, completely helpless, and with no idea what had happened. And she's wiggling her ears, her lips. Somebody help her. The answer was absolute silence. She could only hear some birds flapping their wings and chickadees somewhere above the ceiling. Nancy tried to free herself from the ropes, but the knots were tight. With each movement, the slings only dug harder into her skin. The girl looked around for something to cut the ropes against. But there was nothing in the room except the filthy mattress she was lying on and a couple of boards in the corner. Shit! Nancy burst out. Slowly, she got up on her knees. She was still wearing the red silk dress she had been wearing yesterday. Her hair was tangled and stuck to her face. Yeah, I must look like a scarecrow. What is this place where Frank is? Looking around the room, the girl realized she was in some kind of abandoned house. The walls were covered in plaster, with brickwork peeking through. There was a thick layer of dust and debris on the floor. The remnants of wallpaper were covered with some kind of fungus. Nancy jerked suddenly, her gaze drawn to the window. It was quite high and boarded up, but through them Nancy saw something that could bring her salvation. Glass. There were large shards sticking out along the edge of the inner frame. The girl decided to get to one of them somehow by climbing to her feet. She tried to jump up to the window opening. The first attempt failed. After the first jump, the girl fell to the floor and hit herself painfully. Her legs were bleeding so badly that it seemed impossible to move. Nancy decided to crawl, overcoming her squeamishness, and the girl began to move slowly across the dirty floor towards the window. When she found herself against the wall, she stood up again. This time her legs proved more docile. The bottom edge of the window was at her eye level. The piece of glass was very close and not even blocked by a board, but there was no way for Nancy to reach it. Her hands were securely fastened behind her back. What to do? The girl muttered to herself, "If I can't get rid of the ropes soon, I'm finished." The one who brought me here, apparently, was guided by bad motives. I wasn't just left here to die, so he'll be here soon. I hope she took another good look around the room on her knees. She got into the corner with the boards. There were a couple big rusty nails sticking out of one of them. That's it, rejoiced the girl. The edges looked sharp. We should try to break the rope with them. She turned her back to the boards, sat down on the floor, and carefully began to run her bound hands over the protruding points. She cut her wrist painfully a couple times. The nails were rusty. But the least of Nancy's worries right now was possible infection. The rope had become wet with blood, but that didn't stop Nancy. She kept trying, ripping the cord at least a little bit. But the more she tried, the more it only hurt her skin. Suddenly, her attention was distracted by a knocking sound coming from behind the door. Was someone in the house? Fear and hope mixed in her found head. Not realizing who could be behind the door kidnapper or savior, the girl crawled back towards the mattress. She was about to try to scream for help when she suddenly heard a familiar voice. The speaker was behind the wall in the next room, and clearly he was not alone. To her horror, Nancy realized it was a man, her own husband. For a moment, the hope that had flared in her soul that Frank had come to save her crumbled. When she made out what she was saying, you realize you can't leave her like this. Frank's voice sounded agitated. Of course I understand. A rather low female voice answered him. Nancy did not recognize her husband's interlocutor. The house is abandoned, of course, but there's always the risk that someone might come here by chance. Not likely, though, especially since the building and the room are locked. Even if someone walks by, They won't break in. But what if that idiot comes to her senses and starts screaming for help? We can't take any chances. In fact, I suggest you get rid of her as soon as possible. I don't want any trouble, and neither do you. What do you suggest? Frank asked the stranger excitedly. That, my dear, is for you to decide. You're the brains of the operation. No, I'm not. Clara, you suggested all this. Oh, look at him talk. No, there's no turning back now. Or are you suggesting we just take her home and pretend it never happened? No, shouted Frank. I'm not stupid. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just consulting with you about a way. You realize that we have to do it cleanly so that no one will ever think it was an accident. And we don't have a lot of time. She'll be awake soon enough. And you're right, we can't keep her here forever. Better, on second thought, the woman replied. I have a couple options, but we need time. At least 24 hours. I got a guy I know who's a medical examiner there. We'll have to put your husband in the car and push him off the cliff. I'll get him to write the report. That's right. So what? It's an accident and everything. He knows. He does this kind of work from time to time. You can trust him. God forbid he flies first. I've got a lot of dirt on him. Clara, are you out of your mind? How do you know people like that? And how do you envision this accident? Very simple. Sleeping pills under the knot on the rocking manor driver's seat and parking lot in it, if you want to set fire to it. That for sure for the results of the autopsy, do not worry. The acquaintances will take care of it. All this is dangerous. After a long pause, Frank replied, and what other option to just leave it here? Let him starve to death. And you immediately reported to the police that the wife is missing? No, that won't do. They will find her sooner or later. And the suspicion? They'll understand me. They'll find something to catch me on. We'll work on the accident too, but we just have to be sure. Then we need to make sure no one can find her yet. Well, I'm getting everything ready. At least tape her mouth shut. Nice place you found, by the way. I didn't find a soul around here. The woman laughed suddenly. It has always been here. It's not mine, of course, but no one but me will enter it. Nancy could not believe that her husband's dialogue with this Clara was not a figment of her imagination. This couple is seriously discussing how to get rid of her. Who the hell is this girl? The girl was puzzled. Obviously, she and Frank have known each other for a while. They're planning this whole thing so calmly. And Frank, is he crazy? What did I do to them that they decided to get rid of me so radically? I've got to do something about this, or they'll put their plans into action. Just now, I'm like a mouse in a cage. The voices died down. Nancy nervously listened to the silence. Her heart pounded wildly, and frantically went over in her head the options to buy time. So this woman had said it would take her a couple days to get everything ready. Frank seemed to agree to that. So I might have time, but they're afraid I'll wake up and call for help. There were footsteps outside the door. Someone was about to enter the room. Suddenly, it hit Nancy. She would have a ghostly chance if she tried to play dead. Since she had fainted last night, her husband must have used some kind of drug to put her to sleep. It was possible to fake poisoning. The girl bit her tongue hard. After a couple seconds, her mouth filled with blood. She lay back on the mattress, tilting her head slightly to the side to let the blood flow from the corner of her mouth. For several years, Nancy had gone to yoga, where she had mastered breathing practices. One of them allowed her to put herself into a kind of trance by slowing her heart rate dramatically. It was going to work. The girl froze and began to take a series of deep breaths. A key turned in the keyhole. Nancy's eyes were closed, so she could not see who had entered the room. All her attention was now focused on her breathing. She took one last deep breath and froze. Thoughts were wandering somewhere outside of her mind. Clara entered the room and saw the girl lying motionless on the mattress. Looking closely at her, the woman noticed blood oozing from the corner of her mouth. No shit. Clara burst out. She walked over to Nancy and listened to her breathing. The girl wasn't breathing. Clara set her lip down. She reached up to her captive's neck and tried to feel for a pulse. It was absent, though the body was still warm. Clara shook Nancy by the shoulders, but she didn't react just fine. Hey, Frank, come here. Frank entered the room with a heavy gait. He looked around and didn't immediately realize why his friend had called him. "Honey," Clara said worriedly, "I don't even know whether we have one less or more problem now." "What do you mean?" The man was surprised. "Your spouse passed away. See for yourself." Frank's face showed confusion. "How could she die? Are you sure?" "Yes." Clara was quick to assure him. "Not breathing. No pulse, blood coming out of her mouth." "What did you give her last night?" "I gave her a horse dose before the sleeping pills. It shouldn't have been. Your fiancé must have some kind of individual intolerance." "But if you remember." "I don't remember anything," Frank argued resentfully. He looked at Nancy's breathless body. For a moment, it seemed to him that she had returned. He pushed Clara away and began to feel his wife's pulse himself, but there was no heartbeat. "What's there to check? Don't you believe me?" Clara was angry. "Obviously hell. Your little girl threw herself. That's it. At least it's easier for us not to get our hands dirty. Just put her in the driver's seat. It's a piece of cake. In the meantime, I think we can leave her here. She's not going to call for help, no matter how many bands she's got." Frank stood there paralyzed. Despite everything that had happened recently, he had once loved his wife dearly, and now to see her dead. Realizing he'd had a hand in it, it was wild. But Clara was right. The body could be left here for the time being without worrying about it being discovered so quickly. Frank shook himself out of his daze. "Okay, what do you say?" Quietly he answered Clara. "Let's at least cover it with something. Just to be safe." Clara went into the next room and brought out a couple of dirty cotton coats, tossing them carelessly on Nancy. She left the room. Frank took one last look at his dead wife and followed. Nancy heard a car pull away from the house. While her captors were in the house, she was afraid to even begin to breathe, let alone move. Her whole body ached unbearably. The wounds on her arms were badly posterior, though the blood had already stopped flowing. The cotton batting Clara had covered her with stank horribly. When Nancy took her first breath, she nearly vomited. As she struggled to get out from under them, she finally tried to regain her breath. Now she thanked God that she had decided to take up yoga and mastered this difficult breathing technique, slowing her heartbeat to a lower limit. If Frank and Clara had been a little more persistent, they would have waited for another heartbeat. But Nancy had been lucky. Either the kidnappers were scared, or they were just very willing to take the expected for granted. But now the girl had time on her hands. She remembered that a couple of scoundrels had mentioned near the house. Rarely, but still people showed up. "So I just had to stand under the window and watch for passersby. The problem was that from the high window there was nothing to see. And Nancy had no strength left to stand for hours waiting for rescue. She was unbearably thirsty, and the kidnappers had not even left her any water, for the corpse had no need of it. Nancy tried again to cut the ropes, but the long weave did not give in. Besides, the wounds started again. Abandoning these attempts, the girl tried to look at the problem from the other side. If it is not possible to break the ties, you can try and bend, and try to pull the hands forward. It was the wrists that were bound. Thanks to all that yoga, Nancy was quite flexible. She'd seen a couple of movies where characters had done such tricks, but she'd never tried it herself. Nancy strained her ligaments and twisted her joints as hard as she could. By some miracle, she succeeded. When the girl saw the bound hands in front of her, she cried with joy. Despite the fact that all the skin was covered with deep scratches and abrasions. Now the only thing left to do was to somehow try to untie the knot. Nancy tried to do it with her teeth, but the rope was synthetic, and the knot itself was too tight and tangled. Only now the girl realized why the nails were slipping so persistently. But she managed to free her legs. For some reason, they were not as securely fastened as the arms. Nancy experienced inexpressible relief when finally left her ankles. The rope was now covered with gruesome welts. Frank was probably the one who tied up his wife. Not the least bit sorry for her when he intended to immobilize her, and pity me, Nancy reasoned. If they're going to send me to the other world, they certainly wouldn't think twice about a couple of bruises. The question is another. Why on earth would they intend to get rid of me? Nancy really didn't understand. With Frank, they had already been married for 6 years. There hadn't even been a single more or less serious quarrel in that time. Their only point of disagreement was that the girl didn't want to have children. At first, Frank thought that she was simply not ready. But during the 3 years of married life, he realized that Nancy was firm in her convictions. She didn't see herself as a mother at all. She didn't get a thrill from all kinds of cradles, rattles, strollers, and videos from the net with funny babies. And the sight of mothers walking their offspring in the yard caused disgust. Frank, on the other hand, dreamed of an heir. A couple of times there were conflicts, the right out of which always came out Nancy. She managed to convince the spouses in their views for a time he really accepted them. But some time passed, and Frank again raised the subject. He even tried to tamper with his wife's birth control pills. When Nancy found out about it, she didn't start a scandal. She just did. She went to the hospital and got an IUD inserted. There was nothing the husband could do about it. Gradually, the baby talk stopped. Frank just accepted that his wife was like that and hoped that one day the maternal instinct in her will still take over. But the girl doubted that the unwillingness to have children was the cause of the crime. It was much easier to divorce and find a suitable woman, or even take one with ready offspring. Especially Frank wouldn't have had any trouble with that. The guy was damn good looking, educated, well-mannered, quite well-to-do. Such men, as she liked to say, found a friend Alice on the row is not lying. Could it be money? A year ago, Nancy became the owner of a huge fortune, inherited from her grandmother. When she learned that the last will of the deceased was to leave her only granddaughter a collection of paintings, she was not particularly happy. Classical painting she was not particularly interested in a few dozen canvases, and hang especially nowhere was. Therefore, after consulting with Frank, Nancy decided to sell the paintings. The couple ordered an examination to at least roughly understand how much all this could cost, and were completely unprepared for the result of the evaluation. The most ordinary landscapes turned out to be unknown works by famous artists. Only the starting price of the collection at the auction was up to a couple of $100 million. It was even frightening to imagine how much the buyers would be willing to pay for it by the end of the auction. Nancy was shocked. Frank quickly realized that such a gift of fate could significantly improve the quality of their lives. One of the paintings was sold to a Chinese millionaire. There was no limit to the joy of the couple. The husband, delighted with the success, proposed to auction the entire collection. But Nancy, on reflection, declined. It seemed to her that in the painting's capital will be safely insured, and with such a demand for Russian painting for a few years will grow significantly in value. Frank seemed to accept her decision, but it was noticeable that he was upset. He could not wait to make a favorable deal and to do something more ambitious than to blow dust off the old paintings. But his wife was adamant. It seemed to her that the money received from the sale of one painting, quite enough for a comfortable life and any investment. She quietly gave the entire proceeds of Frank on his personal projects. The rest of the paintings went into a bank vault until better times. Nancy could not even imagine that this would push her husband into crime. In fact, the inheritance was her property. Frank had no rights to it. In the event of a divorce, he would get nothing. The death of his wife is another matter. He would have been the sole heir, and all problems would have been solved. But the other thing is more important. Who was this woman Clara? For all the time of their life together, the girl did not even allow the idea that her husband could have a mistress. Frank behaved as an exemplary husband, and everything indicated that he loved his wife, as well as she him. He tolerated her whims, even if they contradicted her views. He was never absent for long periods of time. Even with these paintings, he gave up easily enough. Had he only pretended, and already in his mind a plan had been born for Nancy to shake off these thoughts. So she said aloud, something had to be thought of right away. Those two could come back at any moment. There was no precious time to lose. Her bound hands were in the way, but the circulation in her legs was already fully restored. Nancy went to the door and held the handle. It was padlocked shut. The door looked pretty sturdy. Nancy, with her frail build and partial immobility, was not going to be able to kick it open. That left the window. The girl went to it, stood on tiptoe, looked through the gaps in the boards. In front of the house, there was a rather vast wasteland, piled with boards of wood from time and dampness. Next to the pile of rotting wood stood a rusty Soviet-style truck. Some kind of old bathtub filled with dark water. Nancy's gaze came upon a fence. It was wooden, but quite high. Where the boards were missing, you could see the road through them. As Nancy stood at the window, 2 cars passed by. She tried to call for help, but the road was too far away, and through the open window her voice was unlikely to penetrate the street. Nancy, powerless, sank to the floor. She was beginning to lose hope. Besides, she was tormented by an intense thirst. The girl realized that a little more and she would die a quite natural death of despair. Large tears rolled from her eyes. Without knowing it, Nancy fell asleep. She was awakened by a noise outside. Startled, the girl quickly jumped up and went to the window. There was someone walking around the house. It was already dusk outside, so she had to look for a long time, and the girl heard a man's voice. Who are the owners? Jesus. Nancy's heart was pounding. People, we have to get your attention right away. I'm here, shouted the girl with all her might, coming close to the window. Help, for God's sake, help, I'm inside. The man who was walking around the house apparently did not hear her. Nancy began pounding on the boards with her bound hands and kept calling for help. At some point, her cries got through. Woman, are you all right? The man's voice got louder. He must have realized where the sound was coming from, screaming at the top of Nancy's voice. I'm begging you, help me. The man walked straight to the window. The girl saw through the slits his face. It was a rather elderly man with glasses. He met Nancy's eyes. Girl, he began. Are you here alone? Are you in trouble? For God's sake, help me out. The house is locked and my hands are tied. You can try to break the door down. The front door is iron. I'm afraid it won't work. Isn't there another way in? I don't know. Nancy started crying. We have to hurry. They could come back at any moment. Who are they? Asked the stranger. It's a long story. Nancy interrupted him hurriedly. Please find a way to help me get out, or they will kill me. The man's face showed confusion. He could see that the girl was not joking. You just don't worry. He hastened to reassure Nancy. I'll get around now. The house will look for another entrance. The room I'm in is locked too. You can break the door. It's wooden. It opens inwards. The man stepped away from the window. Nancy was afraid he would leave her here, preferring not to get involved. She shouted after him not to leave, but the stranger was no longer visible from the window. Shit, the girl cursed to herself. If only he would come back, and then I'm saved. After a few minutes, the man came to the window again. The girl, he said, I went to the car to get a tire iron. There's another door on the other side of the house. There's a padlock on it. I'll try to break it off. Just don't worry, please. Okay, Nancy said and sank heavily to the floor. Soon she heard a metallic clanking sound. Apparently a man was trying to dislodge the lock. It took him a moment, after which he quickly reached the door. The handle lingered, and Nancy tore towards the entrance. I'm in here, again she shouted. Okay, step away from the door. I'll try to kick it open. Nancy obediently stepped farther away. It took the man a few blows before the door began to give way. After another minute, the man fell out into the room with a crash. Nancy shrieked, Are you all right? Concernedly, she asked the stranger as he, affected, rose from the wreckage. It's nothing. Soothed the girl. What happened to you? Why are you bound? I'll tell you everything. But I beg you, let's get out of here as soon as possible. All right, let's go, agreed the man. He saw the poor condition of his new acquaintance, so he saw no reason to delay. I have a car not far away. Can you walk? I think so, answered Nancy. Now she was ready even to run. There's just one little problem. What's that? Nancy's chest tightened. I have a flat tire. I thought I'd go to the owners and ask for a jack. There was a look of panic on the girl's face. When the man saw it, he hurried to reassure her. He saw that she was terrified at the thought of having to stay in this house. Don't worry, we'll just drive a little way and then we'll figure it out. They left the building and headed for the gate. Nancy saw the house from the side of the dilapidated and brick building hollow ethereal roofs, an abandoned lot with scant vegetation. Half the yard was drowned in nettles. Broken glass and stakes, ceramic tiles were lying everywhere. I wasn't sure if anyone lived here, the man explained as they walked along. But there's no houses around here, just this one. And as luck would have it, I got a flat tire. Now we'll sit down, I'll give you a rope. The car was about 100 meters from the fence. It was a pretty decent SUV. The stranger helped Nancy into it. He pulled out a large hunting knife from somewhere and with confident movements cut the thick cord into one. His hands were in a terrible state, but nothing caused them now. It would have to be treated. The cuts look pretty deep, he remarked. Nonsense. The girl tried to smile. Please, let's get out of here quickly. Then all that handling on a flat tire. It wasn't easy to drive. The driver tried to do it carefully. Luckily, after a couple of kilometers, they came to a gas station. Got a jack. The man got a spare tire from the trunk and changed it quite quickly. Oh, it's hard, he said, getting in the car. The old tire's a goner, of course, but the rim's intact, so it's all right. So now tell me where to take you. I live out of the way, hopefully in a classroom. Where is she supposed to go exactly? She can't exactly go home. Frank's there with that horrible woman. Neither can she go to her acquaintances. Now the girl suspected everyone in general to the police, that she will say that her husband with an unknown woman and kidnapped her. And where's the proof? Seeing that the girl is confused, the man decided to take the initiative. So he began. Let's start by introducing ourselves. My name is James, Nancy muttered, and the girl is Nancy. James said thoughtfully, what a rare name that is nowadays. That's what Nancy is. I think you're hungry. Let's go somewhere and you can tell me all about it. Nancy gladly agreed. She hadn't eaten in 24 hours. She was so thirsty that it was hard for her to speak. They stopped at a small roadside eatery. The girl immediately went to the restroom, leaving her companion to order at his discretion. She would eat an elephant right now. The restroom shone with whiteness. Nancy was even surprised. She thought places like this were unsanitary, and the tiles were scrawled with all sorts of obscene writings. She went to the mirror and was horrified at the absenteeism. Her face was in front of dried blood, her hair was tangled, mascara stains were visible under her eyes. The girl put her hands under a stream of cool water. The wounds immediately began to sting unbearably. She thoroughly washed everything with soap at Soap Her Face. Only now the girl realized that she was completely barefoot. The shoes she had been wearing the day before had been left in that horrible room. How could I go barefoot and not even notice? There was glass and rocks everywhere in the yard. It's called shock. She asked her reflection in the mirror. Thank God, there are almost no people. I don't look so bad. Nancy went out into the hall, where James was waiting for her. His order had already been brought to him. The girl hurriedly sat down at the table so that no one would see her bare feet. James, guilty, she began. I don't even know how to say it. I don't have any shoes. Really? Surprised man and looked under the table. You need to fix that right away. I have some old sneakers in my car. If you don't mind putting them on, let me get them now and then we'll go to the store and find something more suitable. A couple minutes later, he came back with a pair of teenage sneakers. Nancy immediately put their shoes on. They fit. My grandsons, the man explained, smiling. They bought him new ones, but he kept them. I'm an old school man. I was sorry to throw them away. I thought they might come in handy. As you can see, my instincts were right. Your instincts don't fail you in principle. If you hadn't been at that unfortunate house today, I dread to think what would have happened to me. And Nancy told James everything that had happened since last night. Yes, the man thought, there's no getting out of it. You realize you can't go home. Worse, they'll come back. They'll see that you're missing, and they'll start looking for you. They'll be driven by fear of exposure. And the intruders will realize that you won't go to the police because of the lack of evidence. What am I supposed to do? I can't even go to my best friend's house. Frank will look for me there first. I don't have any parents, only a grandmother, but she died a year ago. That's what James said, looking Nancy straight in the eye. I know my proposal will seem strange, since this is the first time you've seen me. But I can't leave you in the lurch. You can stay with me for a while, and I'll think of a way to bring your abusers to justice. You know they can't go unpunished, and you must go on with your life without fear of going out into the street." Nancy was visibly embarrassed. She was frightened not by the fact that she had to accept such a proposal from a stranger, but by the very fact that she would have to invade someone else's life so brazenly. "I can see your doubts, Nancy." James was quick to reassure her. "Don't worry, you won't be a burden to me at all. I have a big apartment. I live with my cat and my son. He recently divorced his wife. He's staying with me for now. He can't live alone. And Liam, my grandson, is safe to see. His wife, the former Cindy, lets him go to his grandfather's house without question. You'll get to know each other. It won't be boring. And my son is a smart guy. He'll help you understand your complicated situation. He used to work in the organs, but he left because he couldn't bear to see how the law actually works in our country. He had a keen sense of justice that was shattered by the bureaucracy. James, thank you so much. I don't even know how to thank you. I'll take you up on your offer because I have no other choice. I have no phone, no money. I don't even have the keys to my own apartment or papers. I have a spare key, but I'm afraid to go to her place. That's good." The man was happy. "You'll come to your senses, and then we'll think about it." Sergey's apartment really turned out to be a huge good quality with good repair. When Nancy stepped over the threshold, a huge striped cat ran out to meet her and began to rub her feet intensively. "Meet him," laughed James. "This is Benedict. I hope you're not allergic, because he's taken a liking to you. That rarely happens. He'll never leave his side now." As if in confirmation of his master's words, the kitten gave an affirmative meow. Nancy laughed. "Don't worry," she assured James. "I love cats. My grandmother and I were Siamese. He followed me everywhere, even walked me to school. And he was so smart. Sometimes I used to swear at how human he was." Yeah, they can do that. Not all of them, though. Come on, I'll show you around. Peter's not home yet. He's away for a couple days for work. So don't be shy." The host led the guest through the rooms, showed her a bedroom where she could make herself at home. After the tour, Nancy asked to take a bath. James had prepared some clothes for her, apparently belonging to his son. "I don't think Peter will be too upset to part with a couple of shirts." James winked at her. Nancy finally relaxed into the hot water. She could only now feel how exhausted her body was. After being in the tub for almost an hour, the girl went into the kitchen. Flavored tea was waiting for her. "Here's Nancy," James told her. Walked to the table, serving jam. "I made cherry jam myself this morning." "Oh, really?" Nancy was surprised when she tasted a spoonful of jam. "It's delicious." "Yes, I have my own cherries. We have a whole orchard outside the city," laughed James. "And cooking is my hobby. I used to always fight with my late wife, who will stand at the stove, cook all these berries and vegetables. But I can't help it. I like it. And she herself admitted that I'm better at it. It's rare to get a man to do all that, isn't it?" Nancy thought. She and Frank used to buy everything ready-made. Their grandmother used to supply them with jam. Since she was a child, Nancy had loved to watch her work with berries over a huge copper basin. And then they would roll the jars together. The girl was always waiting for her grandmother to be distracted, so she could take advantage of her absence and savor the hot, sweet treat. "There's no way to force it. It's a passion," James continued. "Some are into fishing, some are into soccer, and I'm into jam. We are all different." Benedict suddenly appeared and jumped on Nancy's lap. The girl began to rub him behind the ear, which made the cat make deep trumpet sounds. It sounded more like a running tractor than a purr. After sitting with James in the kitchen for a while longer, Nancy excused herself to go to bed. The bed, though small, was very comfortable. The blanket helped her fall asleep immediately. The next morning, Nancy woke up well rested, no one bothering her. When she glanced at her watch, she was greatly surprised. It was already 12 o'clock. A normal girl would get up around 9. She got dressed and left the room. James she found in the living room. The man was sitting at his laptop. "Oh, Nancy, good morning," greeted James. "How did you sleep? Good morning." Nancy smiled. "Everything is just fine. I don't usually sleep this long. It's a normal reaction to stress. The body has to get its energy from somewhere to recover. Have you been stressed out a lot? Let me feed you breakfast." Nancy readily agreed. James made scrambled eggs and toast, and the deliciously brewed coffee chased away the remnants of sleep. "And now, Nancy." Sighing, James began, clearing the table. "Tell me, why was your hubby going to do such a terrible thing? You must agree, it is not the most common practice to do such a thing because of disagreements. You can always get a divorce. It's not my business, of course, but I would like to have a full picture to help you move on." Nancy took a long time to collect her thoughts. When she told James about her misadventures, she hadn't gone into much detail, nor was she herself 100% sure of her suspicions. However, the explanation with the inheritance turned out to be the most logical, so she hurried to share the assumption with her savior. "I think," she began, "it's all about the paintings. I received an inheritance from my grandmother a year ago. At first I thought all these landscapes were just old junk, but Frank insisted on an appraisal. It turned out I was the owner of a multi-million-dollar fortune. What are these paintings?" James wondered. "My grandmother told me that these paintings used to belong to my grandfather. I didn't know him at all. He died when I was 2. My grandfather was a collector of paintings, but our family had never been wealthy. I can't imagine how he could have gotten such expensive paintings. As the expert said, some of them belong to the brushes of very famous Russian artists, but belong to the early periods of their work or to the so-called gift works. This is when the author wrote for his friends, and the paintings never made it beyond private collections. I wonder where your grandfather got such a treasure. We'll never know. But after he died, it all went to my grandmother, and then to me. Frank really wanted to sell it all at once to invest in some project of her own. I never took much interest in the details of my husband's work. You should have. We sold one painting. He invested the money right away. He always made good money. My questions were just dismissed. Once he tried to show me the mechanism of work, but to me all these figures and graphs always seemed like gibberish. I'm a pure humanitarian. Any formulas put me in a state of unbearable boredom. But then I was afraid to risk and said that the paintings will sell only as needed. Where are they now? They're all in a bank vault. Frank doesn't have access to them. And anyway, you see, if we divorced, he'd get nothing. My death would solve all his problems. I don't know. It would have been a lot easier to convince me to hang it up at home and order good copies, gradually replacing the originals. I never would have even suspected anything wrong. But I guess my husband wasn't that smart or didn't have the money. And the woman he was with at the time, I have absolutely no idea who she is or what kind of relationship they are in. Well, James thought, it shouldn't be too hard to find out. We already know her name and that she meets your husband from time to time. And that house, you say? She said she used to go there a lot, so we can run the owners. Yeah, but she said she didn't own the house. That's okay. Either way, the owner has something to do with her. Relative, friend, neighbor. Any information you can get. Leave it to me, please. Believe me, I have some experience in this sort of thing. Really? Nancy was surprised. No, I'm not a private detective or an agent. James laughed, seeing her reaction. I just feel it's my duty of honor to bring villains to justice. I'm former military. Really? I'm not surprised, though, seeing as how you kicked the door down with a couple of punches. No, it was just the wood was sticky enough. If I'd been younger, I could have broken it down with one. What do you think, James? Nancy asked after a moment's thought. They've already discovered I'm gone. It's not impossible, the man thought. Even if they have, they're panicking now and trying to figure out where they've gone. Given the broken door, it wouldn't be hard to guess that someone helped. The other thing is, does it realize you're still alive? And I did a pretty convincing job of playing dead. They might think someone just took my body. They might think that, James nodded. If they do, we have a chance to play the game with them, but on our terms. But we'll have to wait for Peter. I'm sure he'll be happy to help us. In the meantime, I don't recommend you leave these walls. There's a risk you might run into someone on the street and they'll pass it on to Frank. I agree, and I don't really need to go anywhere. Peter arrived the following evening. Nancy and James were having dinner in the kitchen when the owner's son came in. He was a fairly young tall man with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Nancy didn't even think there was such a rich color in nature. "Hi, Daddy," he greeted, catching a glimpse of the girl. "I see you have company. Why don't you introduce yourself?" "Yes, son, come in. We're having dinner." James fussed. "This is Nancy Peter." The guy extended his hand, which she shook firmly. Peter noticed that her wrists were marked with a creepy-looking scar. "Long time to come," his father interrupted him. "Don't get the wrong idea. This girl is in trouble, and you and I have to help her." "How was it?" Peter asked with suspicion in his voice as he continued to stare at Nancy. "What happened?" I wondered. "I was robbed at the train station. I had nowhere to go." Nancy couldn't answer for some reason. She felt ashamed. For some reason, she thought her savior's son would not be happy to see her in his own home as an embarrassed girl. James came to the rescue. The son said sharply he Peter and immediately changed his expression. "What, do you think I dragged all the beggars into the house? You know me, I offered Nancy to stay with us for a while. I rescued that girl from an abandoned house a few days ago, tied up and scared to death, and I feel it's my duty as a man to help her deal with her abusers." "In what way is that related?" Peter interrogated. "Why didn't you go to the police?" "She wants to send me to the other world, in fact," Nancy said in a low voice. Peter was silent. He saw that the girl was serious, and from her wounded arm she confirmed her father's words. So Peter rested his hands on the edge of the table. "Let's be more specific." Nancy repeated her story again, mentioning the paintings as the most probable motive for the crime. Now she herself thought the whole story was a bit crazy. But after listening to the end, Peter suddenly became interested. "So I take it you're not going to go to the police?" "So no proof other than my word." "And that's true. I was an investigator myself for a few years. I'd take a statement, but I don't think I'd make a case. The only thing left to do is either try to catch them red-handed, which is almost unrealistic, given that it would put you at great risk, or play a little with them." James suggested as well. Nancy laughed. "I can tell you're his son." "Very interesting." Peter looked at his father. "What kind of game are you playing, Dad?" "We think James has taken a fancy to us. We think they're convinced Nancy's dead and someone's found her body. So maybe we should blackmail them a little bit. Might work?" Peter scratched his chin. "They're probably panicking and won't go anywhere. But we have to get as much information as we can." "You know," Nancy suddenly exclaimed, "I have a friend named Alice. She's a very nice girl. I don't think she's in cahoots with them. I'm afraid to go to her myself. I don't know if Frank will be there waiting for me. But if you talk to her, Peter, she might be able to help." "Okay, I'll keep that in mind." The next day, James got information about the owners of the abandoned building where he'd found Nancy. The house belonged to a Sophia. It wasn't hard to find this woman. Peter involved old acquaintances, and in a couple of hours he had the data. The guy volunteered to personally drive to the old lady's house and make inquiries about Clara. The address was a nursing home. Peter introduced himself as the woman's grandson. Luckily for him, no one asked for any documents. A nurse escorted him to the room where Sophia lived. When Peter entered, the nose was hit by the acrid smell of medicines. The old woman was sitting at a desk reading something. Peter was sharing. "Sophia, hello," he said loudly. The woman shuddered and looked up at him, her eyes hidden behind thick glasses. "Good morning." She greeted him with a well-pitched and surprisingly young voice. She was 86 years old according to her documents. "I'm sorry, I don't recognize you. My eyes don't look the same. Come closer." "Sophia, my name is Max. I'm here at Clara's request. I brought you some fruit." Peter put a heavy bag on the table. "The old lady has been sitting on her hands for a long time and she hasn't shown up. She's doing well. Yes, Sophia, Clara is working very hard. She has no time. She asked me. How could I refuse? We've been friends since we were kids, since school. The old lady asked me again. I don't remember you. Max, you say you're not Livingston. by any chance? No, Peter immediately sensed some kind of trick in the tone of the interlocutor. Solntsev, but Clara and I didn't go to the same school. If that's what you mean, I think I've softened. Sophia, I seem to remember all my students, but I don't recognize you. My eyesight, is no longer the same. But I recognize every single one of my Cossacks, no matter how much time has passed. Cindy, she's one of the few people who visits me here. You'd think she'd have forgotten the old woman by now and lived in peace. No, she can't be like that. The girl's so kind to her. She's always been different from the others. It's been 21 years since graduation, and she's always with flowers and sweets. The nurse comes running to me. She only manages to grumble again, saying that your Clara came and raised everyone's ears. But I smile. I'm just glad that I taught such a smart girl. Good for you. Peter nodded to himself, thinking how cruelly mistaken this woman was. If she knew what her former student was doing, probably would not smile. Now weakened by a heart attack, no less. And you say you went to another school? Yeah, 32nd, nodded Peter. Oh, so it's right next door to ours, the 17th. Yes, it's a pity you didn't get into my class. They were my last class. I retired as soon as they graduated. And now, you see, I've fallen apart. Nobody needs me. Peter spent some more time in the old woman's company, but he could not learn anything useful, although the information he got from Sophia could be useful. Leaving the nursing home, he dialed the number of his friend from the authorities. Mish, he began quickly. Listen, it is urgent to run a person through. Don't ask anything. It'll count for something later. Oh, there was a cheerful voice on the other end of the line. But then he heard a serious matter. Write it down. Clara, age 37-39 years. Registered in the Bright Street. Probably a different address now, but she used to live there. I don't know much data. Please check life and death issues. I know yours. You probably picked up another hottie from death, didn't you? Now you're looking for where she lives so you can wait with flowers. Peter, stop being a romantic. I already divorced one of them for that. Find yourself a good woman, a good housewife, and live in peace. Mike, all wrong, started Peter, but in time realized that it is not worth explaining that the curious comrade is not worth it. Okay, let's as the data will be dialed immediately. I'm listening and obeying, Mike sneered. The former colleague called back in an hour. He dictated to Peter 3 addresses for a woman with such data. Yes, Peter thought 3 isn't much, but it's not a lot. Considering I have no idea what this Clara looks like. All right, well, there's no traffic. Let's run down each of them. To the first address. Door was opened by a haggard-looking woman. She was in her early 60s. Good afternoon, greeted Peter. I can see Valeria. Are you for pennies? Tiredly asked the hostess. I started to Peter, but the woman was already pulling him out into the hallway. Clara got worse today. I woke up in the morning. She is lying on the floor. She must have tried to get into the stroller herself. The stroller. That's what Peter said. Yes, in a wheelchair. Didn't you know that? She's been disabled since she was a child. She can't walk since the accident, but she's still trying to get up. I'm sorry. I tried to free Peter from the woman's clutches. I must have made a mistake. I need Clara. The woman looked at him, flapping her eyes. Suddenly, it was as if she woke up. Oh, I thought, I'm sorry to drag you in like this. Didn't even recognize anything. Is it mine, Cindy? Peter went to the second address, but the stern man at the door said that Valerie no longer lives here 3 years moved to the States. He had one last address left. The house was located right next to the school number 17 mentioned by Sophia. But that should be a sure hit, Peter thought. But if it really is the same woman, he should be more careful. Tales of schoolmates won't fly. Peter pressed the bell button several times, but no one came to the door. He had already decided to come back later, when suddenly the door opened and a middle-aged woman looked out of the apartment. She asked him in a disgruntled tone, I'm sorry, Peter was confused, and I must have woken you up. My name is Max. I've just been to see Sophia, your teacher. Oh my God. Clara was worried. Something's happened to her. She had a heart attack yesterday and was composing Peter. She's fine now. They couldn't reach you for some reason? I'm next on the list. I talked to her today. She really asked me to come and see you. I'll be right there." It was obvious that Clara was very concerned about the old lady. It bothered Peter a lot. He couldn't understand how she could be so caring and cruel at the same time. "Did you also study with her? Or a relative? I just don't remember her having grandchildren." "I'm a distant relative," lied Peter, "on my mother's side. I don't live here, so I don't get to visit her much." "Oh, don't worry, they won't let you see her today anyway. I brought everything. She just said to ask where you've been." "You mean you haven't visited in a while?" "Yes," Clara sighed. "It's just the way it is. I've had a lot of problems of my own. I'm so sorry. I'll be sure to visit her one of these days." Peter said goodbye to the woman, who seemed very tired. It was obvious that Clara hadn't lied about her problems, except that Peter knew very well what kind of trouble the woman was in. Well, now he knew where she lived and what she looked like. He made the decision to sit in the car and observe her. Realizing that the woman wouldn't get out that easily, he decided to get active. He dialed the number Frank had given him from Nancy. A man's voice answered unfriendly. "Hello, Frank," Peter began. "Your wife, or rather, her body?" There was silence on the other end of the line for a long time. Frank must have digested what he heard. "What do you want?" He finally squeezed out. "How much money for silence?" $3 million. Peter said it at random. "Are you crazy? I don't have that amount." "What made you think you had my wife? It wasn't that hard to establish. And don't think that if you don't pay, you'll get off easy. I have footage of your car being at the scene for quite some time." "The time of the girl's death fits right in that gap," sighed Peter. "Let's skip the details, especially now you've asked me what I want. So you really know what I'm talking about. Are you from the police?" Frank suddenly asked. "No," Peter laughed. "If I were the police, we'd be talking differently." "Okay, but I need proof. Can you send me a picture of the body?" "Sure, it'll take me a while. I'll get back to you. As long as it's still that money. If you don't raise the required amount within a week, I'll contact you. Then you'll have to deal with it another way." Peter has disconnected. Now all we had to do was wait. Half an hour later, Clara came out of the entrance and got into a car parked nearby. Peter followed her, looping through the city streets. He already guessed that she had gone to Frank's house. The woman went into the house, but Peter wasn't going to end the stakeout there. Clara stayed at Frank's for about an hour. She came out highly agitated and angry. Slamming the door, she went on her way. Peter followed her, but the woman only stopped at the store and headed home. Peter then decided not to waste any time and drove home. Anyway, so he started from the doorstep. "I tracked down this Clara of yours and called Frank with a ransom demand for the body, as Nancy had mentioned. And what did he say? He agrees, but he wants proof. He wants a photo. So Nancy, let's get you under the body. Do you still have that dress you were wearing back then?" "Yeah, I lost it actually." "That's okay, but I'll have to tie you up and stain your face with something that looks like written blood." "I have paints," said James, who came into the hallway. "I think it'll look pretty natural." It took the next half hour to cremate Nancy. Peter spread plastic sheeting in the hallway for the girl to lie on. They took a few pictures, after which the guy did a little color work, correction. When Nancy saw the pictures, she was even horrified. She really did look dead in the pictures. "Do you think it'll work?" she asked Peter. "It's going to work." The bastard didn't even blink an eye and agreed. The only thing he cared about was where to get the money. Obviously, this couple is in a panic, very afraid of exposure. All the more I frightened him, saying that I had evidence regarding the location of his car at the time of the crime. "Your eyes are so rounded, Nancy." "Wow. What if he demanded it?" "You know," sighed Peter, "I'm the blackmailer here, and I'm the only one who can demand anything." He dialed Frank's number and arranged where he could send the photos anonymously. After examining the contents of the messages, Frank became even more nervous. "How will the transaction proceed?" "You will transfer me the money to the specified details. Within half an hour, I will send you the coordinates of the body. How can I be sure that you will not cheat? Believe me, I'm only interested in money. Otherwise, I wouldn't even call you. What you do with the corpse afterwards is none of my business. Well, that was Frank. No, but rudely interrupted Peter. We're serious people. I don't think you need to be reminded that you shouldn't go to the police. Besides, you don't stand a chance. I'm sure your sweat and grease marks will be found on the body. So you might want to think before you do something stupid. I understand you perfectly well. Frank snapped at me. Not an idiot. Peter grumbled, hanging up discreetly. A real idiot. He sat silently, thinking about something. Nancy was anxious to know the details. James had been pacing nervously for several minutes. That's what. Peter suddenly broke the silence. You said Alice had spare keys to the apartment. She does, Nancy nodded. But I don't know how to get them without giving myself away. We'll have to take our chances. There's no other way. Why do we need to get into the apartment? I think the couple would be actively planning their next move right now. Judging by the fact that Clara went to Frank's house today, it'll happen again, since the apartment was undisturbed. I plan to install a microphone so I can record conversations. I'm sensing they can talk a lot without witnesses. Peter. His father turned to him. You realize you won't be able to get those recordings in court. That's what's needed. Having such a trump card up your sleeve, you can easily divorce these lovebirds on official recognition. The main thing is a competent approach. All right, Nancy agreed. Let's go then. There's no point in delaying right now. Frank must have called his mistress by now. I don't think she'll go to him again tonight. Besides, they're both busy thinking about finding the right amount of money. But we're on our way to Alice now. Nancy. Alice shouted happily, hugging her friend. Where have you been? You can't imagine how worried I was. It's a mess at work. No one knows where you are. The phone's silent. Frank says you're sick, and you can't even pick up the phone. But I know that's not true. I've been to see you. He wouldn't even let me in. I didn't know where to look. The best part is he came by and asked me if it was summer. I was so surprised. And then I call him. Your phone is disconnected, and he's talking about this disease. I wonder what kind of sickness it is that you can't answer your friend close to you. Nancy, best friends unleashed. What I'm about to tell you must stay between us. Do you understand me? Alice looked at her intently. Nancy's tone was not at all joking. The girl realized that her friend was in some kind of trouble, and the man she came with was unfamiliar to her. Nancy introduced her companion. This is Peter, my friend. Alice is my best friend. Peter and Alice exchanged handshakes. The girl liked the man very much. She was very curious where Nancy had managed to meet such a handsome man and disappeared for a few days. Obviously, the friend had gotten into some kind of adventure. That's why Frank's so angry. Alice invited the guests into the room and sat them down on the couch. Well, she began. Tell me. Alice, please don't panic. Nancy warned her at once. The situation is as follows. Frank has turned out to be quite a scoundrel. I know it's hard to believe, but he tried to send me to the afterlife. What? Rounded his eyes. Alice, Frank, he's such a Hamlet. I'm sorry. He can't even cut up a chicken. I remember at the barbecue he stood there with a knife in his hand and cried. Alice, I'm serious. On our anniversary, he gave me sleeping pills, and then I woke up in some abandoned house, tied up. Look at this. Nancy showed me the rope marks still visible on my wrists. It's horrible, whoops. Alice, but that's not all. Nancy continued. Then Frank and some woman came there, and they were seriously discussing how to get rid of me. They wanted to cause an accident. This auntie knows people in all the agencies. No one would even dig. Accidents and accidents. I'd just be buried. Only it didn't go according to plan. I pretended to be dead. Very successful, by the way. So they had to leave my body there while they prepared the next one. That's where Peter's dad found me. Are you kidding me? Alice couldn't believe it. Why on earth would he get rid of you? You've been married 6 years? I don't even remember one serious fight. That's true, my friend. Except I think it's all about the money. Money? Alice was surprised. He makes good money. Why does he need your money? I'm not sure he makes good money anymore. Remember how he persuaded me to sell all the paintings? I only agreed to sell one. I got a good deal on that one, and I gave him every penny of it. He invested, and guess what? It's been almost a year, and I still haven't seen him make any serious profit. I mean, he's made some withdrawals, but given the amount of money he's invested, the amounts aren't commensurate. Have you talked to him about it? Of course I did, but it made sense to me at the time. He convinced me that there was no point in withdrawing the profit and that it was easier to keep it in the system so that it would work and bring in more money. She showed me all sorts of figures, but I don't understand anything about it. What do you think? I think there's no money in the accounts. According to my calculations, there should have been several million in there. In fact, there's only a few $100,000. I don't know where the money went, but now I'm pretty sure it's all mine. Frank spent on his mistress Clara this, with which they plotted to remove me. Alice has digested the information. So what do we do now? There's no way for you to go home. And we've put on a little show, Peter said. These two think Nancy is dead. That's what we thought we'd take advantage of. Oh my God. Alice was horrified. I contacted Frank under the guise of the body snatchers. When they came to the house to get Nancy, they found the door broken in from the outside and no body. Now I'm charging them a tidy sum, which Peter says he doesn't have. Alice, said Nancy, we need the keys to my apartment. Peter wants to install a wiretap so we'll be aware of the couple's plans. Yes, of course, nodded Alice. You just have to get Frank out of the house somehow. You know he doesn't get out much. Don't worry about that, Nancy said. Most importantly, I beg you, don't blab to anyone that you saw me. You're kidding your lips for a long time, Alice. What do you take me for? That I put you in the clutches of these scumbags. I have some interesting information for you, Peter said into the phone. You need to come now, drop off the coordinates. Where? What kind of information? Frank asked cautiously. When you arrive, you'll find out. I hope you are collecting money. We're running out of time. Don't rush me, Frank snapped at me. I told you everything will happen. Peter sent Frank the coordinates. There was no information for him, but it was necessary to lure the man out of the house. Peter sat in the car in front of the driveway. After a few minutes, Frank came out, got into the car, and drove away. Peter wasted no time and went up to the apartment. He opened the door, disarmed the alarm system using the code Nancy had given him. He walked through the rooms and set up 3 microphones in different rooms where he thought Frank and Clara might be most likely to be. Well, he said aloud, I hope this works. He hurriedly left the apartment and called Frank again. There's been a mix-up, he reported. Don't go anywhere. I'll get back to you later. Frank cursed back, but Peter wouldn't listen and disconnected. The man quickly drove home, where his father and Nancy were waiting for him. Everything is ready, he informed his household. Peter turned on his laptop and opened some program. Let's hear what they have going on. For a long time, nothing was heard. Then Frank's voice came out. He was on the phone. Clara said, man, come over right away. I'll meet you there. About 40 minutes later, Clara arrived. Nancy could hear her heels clacking and a disgruntled voice. We're going to have to take a risk, Frank told her. Are you ready? What else is left? What do you have in mind? We need to get to the paintings. That's easy for you to say. Doesn't it bother you that only your wife has access to the vault, and she's dead? Look, all the documents in here are key to the safe deposit box. And the cell phone too. I visited the vault with her. It's rudimentary, no biometrics or anything like that. You just go to the bank, show your ID, fill out a couple of forms, and unlock the box with your own key. Who would go, I wondered? Clara grinned. You and me. Are you serious now? You think the bank employees are so stupid that you can't tell one woman from another, and you're serious. Do you two look alike in build? Do you even have a face in common? Put on a little more color. Put on a wig, her clothes, now practice signing her name. She's only been to the bank once. I don't think anyone remembers her very well. Anyway, this is our chance. And we can take it all at once, pay off the kidnappers, get rid of the corpse, and then just disappear. That's enough money for you, me and Thomas, to live on for several lifetimes. Who's Thomas? Nancy asked in a whisper. Quiet. Peter interrupted her. It's all for later. I don't know, Frank, Clara continued. The idea seems dubious to me. And if we all get in, How will you come with a confident look and show the documents? Well, who, tell me, is an exact copy of his passport photo? The most important thing is to act without hesitation, so that no one sees your excitement. All the more reason for me to be with you. In fact, if we don't take the risk, we'll be in a very unpleasant situation. If Nancy's body turns up anywhere, we'll both end up in jail. Especially since this man claims he has proof that we were at the crime scene when she died. Even if he's bluffing, we can't take any chances. I'd be the first to get suspected. I can't take you with me, of course. But what are you going to do without me? All right. After a short hesitation, Clara agreed. And they will not be embarrassed that I am 10 years older than your wife, and I'm not making it up. You don't look your age. Besides, it's hard to tell how old a woman is. Okay? Clara agreed with doubt in her voice. Tell me something. So they give us the body. What are we going to do with it? There's no way to fix the accident. It's been days. We'll have to get rid of it. I'll file a missing persons report and have the police look for it. After a while, she'll be reported missing because we won't care about the inheritance. It won't concern us anymore. We'll all go away together as far away as possible. There's nothing to keep you here. If the body turns up, how are we going to dispose of it? In the woods? Dig? No, we need another way. A safer way, you know? Suddenly, Clara added, after some thought. I have a friend who works in a chemical factory. If he's well paid, he can get nitric acid. I've heard it dissolves any organic matter without a trace. Acid? Frank asked in horror. What's the big deal? It's the perfect solution for us. No one will ever find Nancy. Let everyone dig around. Yeah, there's something to it. All right, let's buy the body first, then we'll decide. But I'll contact my contact. The rest of the conversation was of no value in terms of case information. When Clara left, Peter and Nancy looked at each other. You realize they're just going to rob me outright, Nancy said indignantly. After the previous events, it seems ridiculous, Peter grinned. Don't worry, they won't get away with it. But we can catch them in the act. I wondered, Nancy thought. Who was this Thomas they were talking to? Is there someone else in their gang that we didn't know about? I'll try to find out, Peter wondered. He didn't like the fact that there was someone else in the case either. Nancy, Peter, and James were discussing a plan of further action. There were two options. According to the first, they were to report the planned robbery and catch the criminals red-handed at the bank when the paintings were in their hands. The second option suggested a more complicated chain of events. Peter proposed to let Frank and Clara leave the bank, and to catch them in the act later, when they tried to get rid of the stolen goods. It was obvious that Frank would try to sell one of the paintings on the black market to get the required sum for it quickly, for time was pressing him hard. Peter knew of several suitable sites by virtue of his old service. All the more reason to know exactly where Frank would try to auction the canvas. Listening to their dialogues with Clara, after a small meeting it was decided to stop at the second option. At 12 o'clock noon, Peter and Nancy were sitting in the car parked in front of the bank branch where the vault was located. They knew what time Frank and Clara would be arriving. The couple had been making intensive preparations since the morning, discussing their every move, so all they had to do was wait for them. Around 1:30, Frank's car pulled up in front of the bank. When Clara got out, Nancy cried out in surprise. The criminals had done their best. In the clothes they had found, Clara looked exactly like her with her long black wig and glasses. Look, she turned to Peter. Well done. If I'd met her like that in the city, I'd have thought I was crazy. Very much like that indeed, nodded Peter. Tell me, are there really no biometric sensors? Strangely enough, not these days. It's enough for them that you have a key to the box, documents. I was surprised myself that they don't even require a fingerprint. But I was assured by the personal manager that the vault was absolutely secure. Personal manager, are you sure he won't notice the switch? That's just it, Nancy laughed. Frank knows perfectly well that the old employee has moved on and I've been assigned a new one. He's never seen me in person before, we've only talked on the phone. So this couple has a good chance of success. When you sign the application for access to the safe deposit box, it's authenticated by phone, just give me the code. Do they have a phone? And Peter's thinking again, Let's hope they succeed. Although for us any outcome is favorable, just the punishment for theft for them will be less severe than for the attempt to get rid of you and the sale of the painting. It's ridiculous to even hope for the success of your own enemies." Nancy grinned grimly. Frank and Clara stayed at the bank for about an hour. Nancy was beginning to worry that the staff suspected something wrong and called the police. Soon, however, the couple emerged from the branch carrying bulky flat bags, each containing a canvas bag. Nancy recognized the pouches as she had personally packed the paintings in them before taking them to storage. "Look," she turned to Peter. "They've taken everything. See, they have 3 bags with 5 paintings in each." "Well done," nodded Peter. "I can't tell you anything. And here's the scoundrel himself. All right, now we can't delay. We must hear what they were going to do next." When Frank and Clara reached the apartment, Peter turned on the tape again. "I told you this would work." Frank's voice was happy and excited. "You're doing great. You should have seen yourself. I even believed it was you, Nancy, for a moment. You should have known how scared I was. I thought I'd get caught at any moment on a little thing. We were very lucky to have the head of the department. That woman had her eye on me the last time I was here. So all the attention was directed at me, and you didn't notice her flirting openly with me. It was funny, I noticed." Clara laughed. "Women show a handsome man and they forget everything. So what do we do now? Let's choose a painting. I'll put it on the internet auction. If we bid low, they'll buy it fast. We've got a few days left, so we'll find a buyer. Look, there's a couple of sites. We'll put it up everywhere to be sure." Frank appeared to be showing Clara the sites. Their names were familiar to Peter. Every time they heard another name that Frank said, they typed it into the search engine. Peter nodded contentedly. "That's good," he said aloud. "As I thought, your husband is not original. He picked the most famous venues. How does he know them?" Nancy wondered. "It's not the first time he's used them. You didn't know him at all. Husband's a real piece of work." "Why, I'm not even surprised," Nancy sighed, noting to herself that Peter had slipped into the first name. She decided to use his example. "And now you want to pretend to be a buyer?" "Yes, but we need to know exactly what painting they're showing. Otherwise, we're going to be going through 100 years of bids. It's not like he's going to put it up under his own name." They're taking their time choosing. As if hearing his words, the criminals began to discuss the painting that would be their ticket to a better life. "The main thing now is not to be greedy," said Frank. "Look, we will have to put the most expensive painting very cheaply according to the appraisal documents. This painting is the most valuable thing in the collection, but it can be sold much more expensive than Clara reasoned. It is possible, but only at an official auction. Not forgetting that we got the paintings illegally, you cannot sell them officially. Our main goal now is to sell one painting, so that the proceeds would be enough for the ransom and our escape. We'll sell the rest gradually. Of course, we'll lose a lot of money, but we won't have to share it with anyone. And in any case, it'll be enough money for a secure old age. Not even our Thomas." That's how Clara's voice sounded more enthusiastic. "Of course, then you can take care of the documents on the paintings, but that they are supposedly in my property and sell already much more expensive. Moreover, no one will report the theft. Now I'm going to ask you to take a picture of the canvas. I'm not much of a photographer." While Clara was busy taking pictures, Nancy frantically remembered which of the paintings was the most expensive. According to the expert's estimation, the intruders had stubbornly failed to pronounce either the title of the work or its author. "Here it is." Suddenly she shrieked. "I remembered." She told Peter which painting the scoundrels wanted to sell, but there was no advertisement with such a law on the websites. It took about 2 hours until finally the proposal was posted. I had to wait a while longer before writing to the seller so as not to arouse his suspicion. Clara called Frank. "Look, we seem to have a potential client." "Is he serious?" the woman asked, puzzled. "I can't tell you yet. He's interested, if the documents and all that." I gave him the results of the examination and hinted that the picture got to me not quite honest way. "Are you crazy? Who would buy stolen goods out in the open like that? Or don't be ridiculous." Frank calmed her down. "That's exactly the point." Peter realized that Frank was hooked and was eager to play the interested customer. He even asked if he could do his own due diligence before the deal. Frank agreed, but his only requirement was time. He hinted to the buyer that he needed to get the deal done as soon as possible, so lengthy appraisals were out of the question. Peter agreed, assuring him that the appraisal would take no more than an hour. It would require meeting at any convenient location with an expert he would send. Frank said that he would bring the painting at any time to wherever it was needed. Peter then gave his own address, saying that there was an art expert living there who would be willing to provide such a service. The meeting was set for the evening. All that was left was to wait. James volunteered to play the expert. He thought that Frank could recognize Peter by his voice, as he repeatedly talked to him on the phone. They prepared everything they needed. Peter went somewhere and brought some optical devices, a scalpel and jars with chemicals. Look, he turned to his father and Nancy. This is usually used to authenticate a painting. Dad, you'll need to look through a magnifying glass like this. Apply a couple of strokes of ruler and acid around the edges of the painting and write a report. I'll prepare the files. All you have to do is print it out and sign it. I got it, son. Don't worry. I hope this Frank doesn't know much about this kind of work. No, Nancy was quick to reassure him. He doesn't know anything about this stuff. He didn't even go to the initial examination with me, so you won't suspect anything. Good, Peter nodded. When the doorbell rang in the evening, Nancy and Peter locked themselves in the back room, and James went to meet the guest. Peter had set up a miniature camera in the living room, where the examination was to take place, so that everything that happened would be recorded. Greetings. James greeted the visitor. My name is Anthony. A mutual acquaintance of ours told me you'd be stopping by today. Please come into the room. Let's not waste any time. Yes, nodded Frank, holding a large rug in his hand. I hope it's not a long process. It all depends on the condition of the cloth. James played the expert with conviction. I tend to see the originals right away. On the other hand, my client said that the painting belongs to the unknown works of this artist, but there are some features characteristic of his brush. Don't worry, I'm a specialist just on it. So it shouldn't be too difficult to identify a non-original. I don't think you would take up my time by bringing the copy here. Of course not, Frank exclaimed hotly. I have the official report in hand, but the client insisted on an additional examination. And his wish is law. Let me take a look. Frank handed James the papers. The man studied the contents of the document for a long time, nodding for conviction. I see you've gone to a good specialist, he said. He read the paper to the end. A former colleague of mine. You can trust his judgment. But let's take a look at the paintings. James carefully divided the canvas into steel, turned on the lamp, and began to manipulate, giving the appearance of professional work. Frank watched his actions carefully. James realized that he was very nervous, but continued, trying not to be distracted by the visitor. Look at this, he turned to Frank. You see, these strokes are characteristic of the artist. Few people have painted in such a technique. It's very difficult to replicate. The Rockefellers are talking about the age of the canvas. It's a match. We'll do a little more chemical analysis, and then we're done. James applied a small amount of the reagents, waited a couple of minutes, and dedicated an ultraviolet lamp to the treated area. Well, after a while, he informed Frank, I can say with certainty that we have the original in front of us. Who would doubt it? Replied Frank. Now I will print you a report, so our client can be sure that everything is in order. I will call him now to verbally confirm that he can safely purchase the painting. While Frank packed the canvas back up, James pretended to be on the phone. He printed out the file his son had prepared, signed it, and escorted Frank out, telling him that he could contact him at any time, should such services be needed again. When the visitor left, Nancy and Paul came out of their hiding place. So was everything all right? James smiled. Now it's up to you. The meeting with Frank was scheduled for 12 o'clock. The place for the transaction was a small office, which Peter had rented in advance so that nothing would arouse the seller's suspicions. The office consisted of a reception area and 2 rooms. The first, Peter set up his workplace. In the second sat Nancy in the company of 2 employees from the investigation committee, Peter's old colleagues whom he had brought up to speed. A girl who also worked for the police was put in the reception area and had to pose as a secretary. When she entered Peter's office and informed the visitors everything was already ready for the play, Frank entered, carrying the same coffee in his hands. "Hello," he shook Peter's hand. "Let's not introduce ourselves to each other. I think it's unnecessary." "Good afternoon," Frank responded to the handshake. Peter's voice sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had heard it. "I second that. Let's get this done as soon as possible. Anthony called me yesterday and said everything was fine. I'll take a look at the picture myself. If I'm satisfied, I'll wire you the money right away. Is that okay?" "Quite," Frank nodded. "How about some coffee?" Peter asked. "I wouldn't say no," nodded Frank. Sitting down in the chair, Peter pressed a button on the switchboard and asked the secretary for 2 coffees. A couple of minutes later, Nancy entered the office from the next room, holding a tray with 2 cups. Frank sat with his back to her, so he didn't immediately notice when she came up to his side, placing one of the cups next to her. And he turned around to thank her, then froze with his mouth open. The next second, he rushed to the front door, but it was locked. To no avail. Pulling the knob, Frank tried not to look at his wife. Frank suddenly turned to him. "Sit down, please." He stood for a few seconds in indecision, then obediently sat down in the chair. "What's going on with your voice?" he asked. "Can't you guess?" Nancy answered him. Frank felt his palms sweating. He looked at his wife, and they ghosted. "See, darling, calm down," she went on. "It's all over. Are you alive?" Barely moving his tongue, he said. "But how did I see your corpse myself?" "I know, darling," she smiled. "I'm a good actress. Aren't you?" "Who are you?" Frank turned to Peter. "I'm the one who gave your wife a chance to take revenge on her abusers. Are you with the police?" "No," Peter said absent-mindedly. And then Frank realized he was the man he had spoken to on the phone. "What are you up to?" he asked angrily. "Do you think you can accuse me of anything? You have no proof. In short, no one will believe even the convincing ones." "That's where you're wrong," Peter interrupted him. "We have more than enough evidence. All your conversations with Clara were recorded, as was your visit to the expert. Even if we can't get you for attempted murder, believe me, you'll go to a place not so far away for grand larceny. That shouldn't be too hard to prove. I think the bank records will suffice. And keep in mind that not only you, but also your friend will suffer. She was the main perpetrator, taking the paintings from the box." "It was all her," Frank said after a moment's pause, sighing heavily. "Nancy, I didn't mean to. I swear to you." "Didn't mean to what?" His wife looked at him scornfully. "Getting rid of me, we've heard everything from planning the accident. You drugged me with sleeping pills on the day of our anniversary, ruthlessly tied me up, and didn't even make sure I was really dead. You brazenly stole from me, and then you say you didn't mean to. You don't know anything. Don't tell me you were forced," sighed Peter. "I realize that you're going to start shifting the blame to the other person, although it's obvious that you're both to blame." Frank was silent for a long time, picking the armrest with his fingernail. He realized that he couldn't get away with it. Unless these people were lying. It was clear from their faces that they were determined. The truth would have to be told. He did not expect Nancy to forgive him, but there was still hope inside him that his wife and her acquaintance would show him some mercy. If he repented for what he had done. Clara Frank had met him 4 years ago. At that time, he was already 2 years married and really loved his wife. However, marital happiness was marred by the fact that Nancy did not want children. Unlike her, Frank literally raved about having a child. He dreamed of a son, but any conversations with his wife on this topic did not bring results. The man did not understand how this could be. Both were healthy and had a stable income, their own home. In the eyes of the public, their couple was ideal. Alas, Nancy's maternal instinct was completely absent. One day, after another attempt to persuade his wife to have children, defeated Frank went to the nearest bar. He had already drunk more than 1 glass of whiskey when he saw an attractive woman next to him. The conversation started immediately. The pretty blonde introduced herself as Clara. She was well into her 30s, but her personal life was not going well. The woman had been through a divorce and it turned out that she shared the same problem with Frank. Clara's ex-husband did not want to have children, and this was the reason for the divorce. Clara did not want to give birth just for herself, so a child from a casual relationship was out of the question. The woman dreamed of a full-fledged family. As they say, either everything or nothing. Desperate, she chose the second option. Frank also shared his worries about his wife and their future together. Under the influence of strong drink and common grief, Frank and Clara did not notice how they found themselves in the same bed. The man never thought of cheating on his wife, but then something came over him. In the morning, he repented of his deed and, leaving the apartment, tried to forget about what had happened. However, the new acquaintance did not get out of his head. He went several times to the bar where they met, but the woman was not there. Then he decided to go to her house. Frank himself did not know why, but something irresistibly drew him there. Clara met him, surprised. She had never expected that the casual acquaintance from the bar would show up again. From then on, they began to see each other constantly. Every chance they got, Frank drove to her place. Nancy had no idea. He didn't want to lose his wife, but he wasn't going to give up his mistress either. And then Clara told him that she was pregnant. Frank at first did not even believe it, but while the information gradually reached him, he became more and more confused and seriously, still not believing, he asked Clara, "Yes, I went to the ultrasound yesterday. It's already 8 weeks. Is the due date a boy or a girl?" "Stupid?" asked Frank. "Silly," laughed Clara. "How can you tell at this stage? You have to wait. So you mean you're going to keep the baby?" Frank was surprised. Of course, Clara said it as if she had been slapped in the face. "How can I get rid of it? A child is all I've ever dreamed of. You realize you'll have to raise it alone." Even so, the woman replied sadly, "Will it all work out somehow?" "No, Clara, you mustn't think so." Frank contradicted her hotly. "I won't leave you alone with the baby." "Do you mean to say that he will divorce?" The woman was surprised. If necessary. But time passed, and Frank was in no hurry to tell his wife about his second woman. First, he was afraid of hurting her, and then it was silly to start a conversation. Clara was not satisfied with this state of affairs. She constantly reminded the man of his promise. But Frank found another excuse. When Clara gave birth, she calmed down for a while. All her thoughts were devoted to her newborn son Thomas. She was quite satisfied with the fact that Frank visited them every day, gave gifts, bought everything necessary for the baby. He was deceiving his wife, telling her that all the money he was earning was invested. In reality, any profits he immediately withdrew and gave to Clara and Thomas. He didn't want them to need anything, so he preferred to deceive Nancy, who continued to be clueless. It suited her just fine that her husband had stopped pestering her to have a child. He successfully concealed his left-handed adventures. Constant fluctuations in exchange rates led to the fact that Frank lost on another deal a very large amount. At that time, Thomas was already 2 years old. One day he came to Clara and told her about his financial difficulties. The woman reacted rather aggressively. She is used to getting everything from her lover, just ask for it. But this time her desires and his possibilities were at odds. "How long will it last?" she asked unhappily. "I can't say yet, but we'll have to tighten our belts for the next few months. I know you wanted a car, but I can't buy you one yet. Do you have any idea how hard it is without a car when you have a small child? I can take you anywhere." Frank tried to defend himself. "Of course you can. And what if you need to go to the hospital at night? That you leave your wife and rush to us? I find that hard to believe." "Clara, yeah, you say something like that. I'll be there if you call me. That's my son. What's stopping you from always being there for your son?" The woman rebuked me. "You're doing well, I see. You think if I don't bring up your divorce, I've forgotten everything? No, darling, I'm tired of living like this. It's up to you. Either you do it right now or you get out of our lives." Clara Frank had never expected his mistress to demand such decisive action from him. He had already gotten used to the way things had turned out, so he had stopped thinking about divorce. But now to leave Nancy was simply necessary, otherwise he would lose his son. Clara was a pretty tough person, so she would hardly go back on her word. All right, I'll file divorce papers shortly. But when Frank returned home, Nancy shocked him with the news of the inheritance. And when it turned out that his wife became a millionaire overnight, Frank, thinking that now was not the right time to leave her, especially when they sold the first painting, he immediately became the owner of a tidy sum, which his wife gave to his business without even blinking. Frank immediately bought Clara a car and explained that, since the situation has changed, it is better to wait a little with the divorce, trying to get even more money. Satisfied with the gift, Clara changed from anger to mercy, agreeing to wait. But as time went on, she was in a hurry to sell the canvases. No matter how Frank persuaded her, the problem was that the woman was not interested in money at all. All these profits, exchange rate fluctuations, and other financial things caused in her even more longing than talking about the child. However, she was well aware that painting could be a good investment and a reliable insurance for a rainy day. When Frank explained all this to Clara, the woman became enraged. She realized that the man was not going to divorce, and the money was quickly melting away. It was necessary to find a way out. And one day she suggested a terrible thing to Frank. "Listen, darling," she began affectionately when Frank arrived again. "Tell me, do you love Nancy? What are you starting again?" Frank replied unhappily, "And I mean it. No, don't think so. I'm not going to start the topic of divorce again right now." "What then?" the man muttered. He had already subconsciously sensed in Clara's tone some kind of trick. "But do you love her or not?" She insisted. "No, I don't." "You realize I'm with her now, don't you? It's only because of these features of living paintings that I'm trying to get her to sell something. Business is slow. If I don't get any money soon, I won't be able to help you like I used to." Clara said cryptically, "What are you willing to do for Thomas and me?" "Anything," Frank replied passionately. "Anything." Clara smiled. "Then listen to what I have in mind. You won't get anything after the divorce, right?" "That's right," nodded Frank. "What if Nancy dies?" "If she dies, all her property goes to me. I'm the only heir, and she has no relatives." "Well, there's your answer." Clara continued to smile. "I don't understand. What's the answer? What makes you think Nancy is going to die? She's not even 30. No, she's healthy as an ox. You know, honey, there are 1,000 accidents in the world every day." "Wait a minute." Suddenly Frank figured it out. "Are you suggesting we take her out? Fake an accident. What's the big deal?" The woman shrugged. "What's the big deal?" "What's the big deal? It's a living person. What right do we have to send her to the afterlife? It's a crime." "Clara, are you going to lecture me now? You know what I don't like? My plan is failing. Forget about coming here. We don't want your money or you. And don't even think I'll ever be your underground son." Clara knew how to manipulate Frank. He was really willing to do anything for Thomas. He sat there at a complete loss, realizing that the woman wasn't kidding. If he crossed the threshold of the apartment now, he would never see them again. Good. He sighed heavily. "What do you suggest?" "I don't know yet. I just suggested it." Clara said smugly. "Honestly, I didn't think you'd say yes, did I? Yes, I'm a rascal. To send his beloved wife to the grave for the sake of his son. Very Shakespearean." Frank chuckled. "Lady Macbeth, too," he thought, looking at Clara. "They do anything for money. Filthy woman. If it hadn't been for Thomas, I would have left a long time ago." But he had no choice. He felt sorry for Nancy. He'd grown used to her over the years. And she was a good person. Should she have given in to his entreaties and sold those stupid paintings? It was her own fault. She should have been so stubborn. A couple days passed when Clara called to say she had a plan. Frank rushed right over. "You're going to do this," the woman began. "It's your anniversary the other day. Here, Mike, give her some sleeping pills. Then put her in the car and see her at the address I'll give you. I'll meet you there." Frank did everything Clara wanted him to do. When Nancy passed out, he carried her to the car and drove her to some abandoned house. There wasn't a soul around. Inside, Clara was already waiting for him with ropes. Together, they tied the girl up tightly and locked her in a room. In the morning they returned, horrified to find Nancy dead. This outcome partially disrupted their plans, but Clara assured them that it would not be a serious problem. She had connections through which she expected to make it look like an accident. The problem came later when they arrived and the door was open. The body was gone. Clara didn't understand how anyone could have gotten into the house. But the fact remained. They were now in a very unpleasant situation. Both of them had no idea what to do. What frightened them most of all was that the corpse had fallen into the hands of the police. But Clara argued that the chances of that happening were extremely remote. And even if it was, there was no evidence that they had anything to do with Nancy's death. At first, Frank offered to report his wife missing, but Clara demanded that he hold off. And then we got the kidnappers. You know what happened next? Frank sighed heavily. Why didn't you tell me you had a son? Nancy asked. Do you think I would have acted like a brute? What would you have done? Pat me on the head. It's treason, Mother. Of course, I wouldn't have been happy about it. But I loved you, and I knew you wanted a child. It could always have been amicable. What are you talking about? It's easy to talk about it now, when it's already happened. You'd have just thrown me out of the house and left me penniless. Even so, Nancy argued. But is that any reason to decide to commit a crime? You know me well. I don't leave my loved ones in distress. If you talked to me, I'd have given you a couple of those ill-fated paintings just to get you out of my life forever. What's the use of talking about it now? Frank said sorrowfully. You can't undo what you've done, Nancy. I'm really sorry about what happened. If I had the chance to make it right, I would have done everything in my power. And what happens now? Now you're going to be arrested, Peter said calmly. You realize that even after a confession, you can't just let it go. Of course, it all depends on Nancy whether she'll claim an attempt on her life, robbery, and all that. But I'd do my best to punish you, Valerie. You questioned the life of another human being, driven by your greed. I am willing to be punished, nodded Frank. Just please don't hurt Clara. She has a small child. Thomas won't survive on his own. How's that working out? With one eyebrow raised, Peter asked, According to you, this woman is to blame for everything. And now you want her to get away with it. And in the bank, she was the person who took the paintings from the vault. No, Frank, it doesn't work that way. She's the mastermind. She's not going to get away with it. Then we can make it look like I forced her to do it. You see, I have to spend the next few years in prison anyway. Thomas will have no one to take care of him. I am taking care of him. Nancy suddenly blurted out, which raised Frank's eyebrows. What do you mean, you? You can't stand children. Why would you do all that? And why would you care about the child of someone who almost took your life? It's called humanity, Frank, sighed Nancy. I have enough money to take care of the child until his parents are released. I'm not going to claim him, but I agree to be a guardian. In spite of everything, I don't want to ruin anyone's fate. But I can't let this woman go free without realizing the consequences of her actions. Thank you, Frank said only. After these words, the operatives came out of the room and charged Frank. They had his full confession in their hands. The man obediently put up his hands to have the handcuffs snapped on him. The investigation lasted 4 months. Frank and Clara were charged with fraud and grand larceny, attempted sale of stolen property. Nancy decided not to report her kidnapping after all, even though Peter tried to insist otherwise. Peter, she persuaded him. Look, it didn't work out, all right? They're already facing a lot of jail time for the paintings. There'll be time to think about everything they've done. It's up to you, of course. The man shook his head. But I think a criminal should be punished for his actions. That's exactly what they did. It didn't work out. So in fact, there were no actions. I forgave them, and I drove them to despair. I should have just left him when I realized that he wanted a child, and I didn't. Kept spoiling his life. I feel sorry for that woman. Honestly, I do. I'm not excusing her. She's punishing herself more than our law can do. She's condemned herself to be separated from the son she loves. How much do you think they'll get? Well, with a plea of cooperating, I'm thinking 5 to 6 years. If they behave, they could get out early. You're seriously considering taking custody of Thomas. Of course, I promised. A child shouldn't have to suffer for the sins of his parents. And I'd rather have him than in an orphanage. Frank and Clara have reached a verdict. Both of them, as Peter said, were sentenced to 5 years imprisonment in a general security colony. Nancy returned to her apartment, but this time not alone, but in the company of a little boy. Thomas was 3 years old. He was already talking well. Nancy was even surprised at how connected the child's sentences were. She furnished a nursery for the baby and put him in kindergarten. Every day she took him to the nursery before work and picked him up afterward. Very soon she became very attached to the child. Without realizing it, Peter often came to visit. He said that the kid should see a man in front of him. As an example, she only spoiled him a lot. The girl argued, but realized that Peter was right. Sometimes they went together to James's, where Thomas found a wonderful friend in the person of good-natured Benedict. A close spiritual bond developed between the boy and the cat. Nancy was preparing for New Year's Eve with little Thomas, and they went to the mall to buy gifts and Christmas toys. Nana, Thomas addressed her. For some reason, he had nicknamed Nancy that and stubbornly refused to change his habit. "We'll buy a cake. Do you want cake, honey?" Nancy smiled. "Sure, we'll get cake and tangerines and colored balloons. And then you and I will go to the Christmas tree market." "Hooray!" shouted the joyful boy. "Christmas tree, have you asked Santa for a present yet?" Nancy asked the boy. "Yes." Squinting his eyes, the little boy answered. "And what, I wondered, did you ask him for?" "I won't tell," Tom replied stubbornly. "Well, tell me." Nancy patted him by the hood. "I promise I won't tell anyone." Honest. More honest than an honest puppy. Thomas said this with his lips pressed together and stared at the floor in silence. A puppy. Nancy was surprised. A real one. Sniffled the child. "Don't you think the puppy will freeze while Santa Claus is bringing it from the North Pole to you?" "He's got a fur coat, a warm nanny." "And that's right," smiled Nancy. Of course, a dog was not part of her plans, but for some reason she wanted to fulfill the boy's wish. Having collected a whole mountain of purchases, they went to the Christmas tree market. To Nancy's surprise, there was James, who was also buying a Christmas tree. "Nancy," the man greeted her. "What a meeting. I see you're getting ready for the holiday too. We're going to buy the biggest tree we can," Tima proclaimed. "Like this one." "Wow, serious plans," laughed the man. He helped his friends choose a tree and load it into the car. "How about we all celebrate New Year's Eve together?" "Yay," Thomas rejoiced. "On it, we're going." "It's kind of embarrassing." Nancy was embarrassed. "Nancy, why are you embarrassed?" James asked. "We're not strangers. Both Peter and I would be very happy. Don't say no." "All right," agreed the girl. She was glad that these men, who had become part of her life under such dubious circumstances, had not left it, even when it was over. On New Year's Eve, she pulled up to the James house with the one and only. Taking gifts of groceries out of the trunk, she handed the boy a dressed-up box so that he could personally present his gift to his beloved grandfather. Thomas personally chose what to give James. It was a funny Christmas sweater that immediately caught the child's attention in the store. But she asked Nancy would Grandpa like it. Of course he would. She hastened to reassure the child. "It was you who chose it, you say," the child suddenly added. "Mommy and Daddy are coming too." The question stumped Nancy with the topic rarely asked about his parents. The boy was told that they had to go away for work, but would be back very soon. But it was noticeable that the child missed them a lot. Although Nancy tried to do her best to divert his attention, the door was opened by Peter. It was noticeable that the man was very happy to see the guests. Together, they walked into the beautifully decorated living room, in the center of which was a huge Christmas tree. Tom immediately rushed to look at the toys in the company of his favorite cat. "And we have presents," Nancy said cheerfully. "James, these are for you." The girl handed the owner her box, and the subject quickly ran up to give his gift as well. Yes, this is for you." The boy was literally glowing with happiness. When James took out of the box a brightly colored sweater from the snowman, he laughed for a long time, but immediately went to change clothes. "This is for you, Peter." Nancy smiled shyly, handing the man a brightly colored package. Inside was a kaleidoscope. What a thing! Peter marveled, and laughing. We together with the theme chose not the most serious gift, even children's I understand. But for some reason it seemed to me that it is the one that will give you bright emotions. All the more difficult to give a man something really necessary. Nancy, this is a wonderful gift. Imagine, I had one just like it when I was a kid, but small. I used to play with it a lot, especially when I was sad. I don't know how you came to buy it. But I'm very glad, really, the girl smiled. Clean, nodded Peter. And I've got something for you too. He took from the shelves a large box, in which Nancy found a bracelet of surprising beauty. Jesus, Peter, it's so expensive. Are you out of your mind? What are you talking about? It's a gift. Please don't make me feel guilty. I took so long to pick it out. I really like it. Let's put it on right now. Peter clasped the clasp on her slim found wrist, and the piece looked even better. Nancy blushed thickly. Alice insisted that the wedding be organized in nature. They put up tents everywhere, hung garlands of flowers and lights. There were not many guests, but the company was very friendly. A small orchestra was invited. Live music created a surprisingly relaxed atmosphere. Immediately after the registry office, the newlyweds arrived at the glade prepared for the celebration. Nancy wore a stunningly beautiful dress, a tiara in her hair, and a bracelet on her wrist, given to Peter on New Year's Eve. From that very day, the girl did not part with the jewelry, considering it a personal lucky. In the summer, Alice prepared a wonderful holiday. Guests danced, enjoyed treats, the patronage of which was taken by James. He sweetly with the guests, talking about his culinary secrets. The girls literally clung to the charming chef. During the time during which Thomas went to the daycare center, Nancy managed to make friends with many moms whose children went to the same group. Some of them she was happy to invite to the wedding, because now they had so many common themes. Contrary to her expectations, motherhood was not as overwhelming a task as she had always thought. Of course, Nancy realized that Tema was not her son. But thanks to this boy, she was able to accept the responsibility she had always dreaded. It seemed terribly foolish to her, even now, the fury with which she had persuaded her ex-husband that children were unnecessary. It was all the fault of banal fear. But as they say, you can't beat a wedge. When Thomas came into our lives, there was no turning back. She always honored the commitments she made. It wasn't long before she realized that a baby wasn't the scariest thing on the planet, and when it became clear to her that it was possible to have a constructive dialogue with him. Then it became clear that motherhood is also very interesting. Thomas grew up very quickly. The boy was already 4 years old. He was getting bigger and smarter. Peter thought it was right to teach him to read. Very soon it became clear that the child showed great interest in the new hobby. Then Nancy decided not to stop there and gave him to an English learning group for preschoolers. And there Thomas did not fail. The girl was glad that her boy is developing so rapidly. Alas, as much as she wanted to, the boy was still not hers. Sometimes Nancy had fits of unbearable longing. She realized that in a few years Tema's real parents would return and the child would have to be given away. But for the time being, she didn't want to think about it at all. The newlyweds went on a wedding trip together with Thomas. James volunteered to babysit. He told the newlyweds to think about nothing and enjoy themselves. And so they did. 2 months later, Nancy realized she was pregnant. At first, she was wildly frightened when the gynecologist confirmed her fears. The girl sat in confusion, looking at one point on the wall. "Will you keep it?" the doctor asked dryly. "What?" Nancy asked again. "I'm asking. Do you plan to keep the baby?" "Of course," the girl answered, not very confidently. "It's just that you look so confused. That's why I'm asking." "First pregnancy." "Yes," nodded the bewildered Nancy. "But it's no big deal. Now, then we'll put you on the registry. All that remains is to wait." "Thank you," she muttered and left the office. She didn't dare to dial Peter for a long time. Somehow it happened that they had never brought up the subject of a child. Peter remembered perfectly well what his wife's unwillingness to have children had brought him to. He already had a teenage son, so the question was not as acute as it had been with Frank. Everyone was already used to Thomas as if he were his own child. "Sashenka." Nancy spoke to her husband in a trembling voice when he answered the phone. Yes, darling, your voice is shaking. Is everything all right? Worried Peter. Don't worry, everything's fine. Nancy hastened to reassure him. But for some reason she herself cried. Nadia, what's wrong with you? I can hear you. Are you crying? Well, speak quickly. Peter, please come and pick me up. I'm texting you the address right now. Sure, Tuck. Just don't cry so fast. Peter wasn't fooled. 10 minutes later, he was there. Hope sat on the bench looking resolved. He came over to his wife and sat next to her. Well, tell me, what happened? In a serious tone, he began. Peter, still in a trembling voice, answered Nancy. You and I are going to have a baby. The man at first thought he had misheard. So sudden and unexpected did this news seem to him. Then he realized that his wife was serious. He jumped up from the bench and scooped Nancy up in an armful, surrounding her. Is it true? With burning eyes, he asked, looking at the confused Nancy. On the face of it, so don't say anything. I can see by your silly look that it's all pure truth. Nancy laughed and cried at the same time. She felt so at ease in this man's arms, and she realized that he was the one who was to be the father of her child. Peter, she whispered, is this really happiness?